Hello, everyone, and welcome to this impromptu live stream for Bad Faith podcast. I gotta say, the news cycle has really been kicking my tuchus. I've really been feeling the constraints of only having a twice weekly show and no longer having the outlet to speak to the events of the day on Rising the way that I used to be able to. So after a couple of weeks of feeling pretty overwhelmed by the volume of news that I wasn't able to cover, I decided to finally submit to the reality that I've got to join the ranks of people who stream a lot more regularly than I do. And I am really pleased to be joined on today's live stream by Kshama Sawant. You know her as the Socialist Seattle City Councilwoman that put a $15 minimum wage on the map. And as we evaluate what the left should do in response to Zohran Mamdani's win, and in particular, our corner of the left, where we've been very skeptical of the ability to succeed within the confines of Democratic Party politics, there's few people that I would rather talk to about how we should be thinking about this moment going forward, especially since she is also in the middle of her own battle against a Democratic Party incumbent in Seattle against Adam Smith. And so she's a perfect person to talk about how to fight against the Democratic Party, how to operate, if possible, within the Democratic Party, and what the takeaways of this moment should be. Welcome back to Bad Faith Podcast, Kshama Sawant. How are you?
I'm doing good, and it's a real pleasure to be with you again, Brianna. It's always just a delight to speak with you, so thank you for having me.
It really is. The pleasure is mine. You're a favorite of the Bad Faith audience. As I'm sure you know, you've had some really viral moments on Bad Faith in the past, and maybe today will be a repeat performance. First, I just want to get your reaction to the Zohran Mamdani win. Especially because I've been having this conversation sort of sidelined with some other folks on the left and people in my life who share my politics, which is that we can't help but feel hopeful and excited. And that makes us feel scared because we've hoped before and been disappointed before. And certainly I think there are ways that Zohran Mamdani feels meaningful and substantively different than some of the folks that have disappointed us in the past. And we can talk about those differences. But are we wrong to hope?
I think it's a little bit of all of that. First of all, I think the left, and including the exceedingly rare militant part of the left, which includes me, it would be paramount for us to understand, and we would be doing ourselves a disservice if we didn't understand that this is a resounding repudiation of the Zionist lobby. If this Democratic primary does not tell us that the Zionist lobby can be defeated, then I don't know what else will. So I think that is something to concrete for us to be hopeful about, that this can be done. And in fact, to be honest with you, a lot of the supporters of my campaign here, my congressional campaign, I'm running an anti-genocide, pro-worker, independent socialist campaign against genocidal, warmongering Democrat Adam Smith, who's a general among the war hawks. A lot of our supporters are actually messaging us saying that they are very excited by what happened in New York City, because that tells them that this campaign can have real momentum, and they're sort of redoubling their vigor in being involved in this campaign. This victory for Mamdani also shows that you can be relentless on working class demands and win. And okay, to be honest, I will say that what we have shown that for 10 years. I ran 4 elections on the city council, always as an independent socialist, and I won all of those elections. We won historic victories, including the nation's highest minimum wage, which is now $20.76, the Amazon tax, and unprecedented renters' rights. And we have shown repeatedly that it can happen, but Mamdani's news is obviously being greeted by people who were probably children 10 years ago. And so for the younger generation, it's very crucial to see a sort of that play out again, that this can happen. And then the third thing it shows, which again, is in the hope category. I'll come to the being sober category in a second, but the hope category also, what a stinging rebuke to those union leaders who supported Andrew Cuomo.
Yeah.
SEIU, not just one local, but 2 large SEIU locals, Teamsters locals, RWDSU, the union that ran the unsuccessful campaign to unionize Amazon workers in Bessemer, Alabama, UFCW. These are not fringe unions. And I have to be clear, it was not the rank and file of the unions. It was the union leadership that decided to endorse Andrew Cuomo. And it really begs the question, what the hell kind of union leader do you have to be to endorse somebody who has been so severely discredited as Cuomo that he's become like a hot potato, even for sections of the Democratic establishment, because, he's a liability now because of his record of all the thousands of COVID deaths, hiding all of that information and then using public resources to promote his own book, and the string of sexual harassment accusations against him, more than a dozen. So it really shows you that these union leaders, these union bureaucrats, really, they are on the completely wrong side of history. Now, the question that looms large is, what would it take for the working class of New York to win victories on the demands that Mamdani is talking about? And I support those demands. $30 minimum wage, absolutely. Rent freeze, absolutely. Free transit, free childcare for babies and children. All of these are demands that the working class desperately needs to win. But it begs the question, what is the approach that will be needed to win? And of course, we want to parse through that in detail. But just one thing I'll say before I hand it over to you is that I think, and this goes to your whole, the trepidation that you're feeling, which you are correct to feel. If you're not feeling trepidation, then you are not in touch with the reality. Because every so often we working people and people on the left, we are told that there's a shiny new shortcut to avoiding class struggle, avoiding actual political confrontation with the bosses, with Wall Street and the billionaire class, and keeping peace with the Democratic establishment, and yet winning for the working class. That's where I think it is my duty for the working class to puncture that bubble and say, no, there is no such shortcut. You can have these shiny new coins every so often, but ultimately history, of all time in under capitalism, and also our 10 years on the Seattle City Council decisively proves that wrong. There are no shortcuts. You have to have absolutely not just class struggle, but you have to go into class war against the ruling class.
Yeah, I was mooting this with a friend recently. I was struggling because he was basically pushing back against the idea that third parties are the answer. That this obviously demonstrates that there is a path forward within the Democratic Party. You have heard these arguments that at least you can have the possibility of winning. Maybe AOC and the squad members are insufficient. Maybe they've made compromises that we would criticize, but where are the Greens anyway? What is the point? And I think there's another way that you can look at this, where you see the amount of money, corporate money that was spent on this race by Andrew Cuomo and his surrogates trying to win, the way that the media and all of these other kinds of establishment institutions closed ranks to try to vilify Zohran Mamdani, including right down to the Colbert Show. Colbert, someone who in the past, at least in his persona as Stephen Colbert that he used to have, has done a really pointed criticism of Zionism and AIPAC's role in sort of influencing American politics. Even he, Israel baited Zohran when he came on the show. So you can look at everything that was aligned against him, and now look at how they're, trying to get the troops together again to prevent him from actually winning the mayoral race by either Cuomo, who has just announced that he plans to run as an independent, whether it's getting behind Eric Adams, who is expected to run as a Republican in the race, anything to stop Zohran Mamdani and say, okay, this is proof positive of the fact that it ultimately doesn't work. You can have these successes that are meaningful and important. I think it's meaningful and important for Zohran to be going on the Breakfast Club and red pilling Charlemagne the God, so that now he's extemporaneously extolling the virtues of socialism. We can watch that clip if people are interested. I think it's good that he's going on Aaron Burnett's show on CNN and explaining his critique of socialism, and being able to do so, frankly, in a way that's more competent and cogent than some of the other squad members have done in the past. And I think that's a good thing, but ultimately,
you mean critique of capitalism?
I'm sorry, of capitalism. Sorry. his critique of capitalism, but that it's ultimately a good thing that he's doing that, but that in fact the fact that people are still trying to get him out and that he might not actually be able to be mayor. I mean, we're rooting for him, but that he might be stopped is evidence of the fact that ultimately we need to be building outside of the party at the same time. What do you make of this?
We absolutely need to be building outside, but I don't think it's even. I mean, what I'm saying that is that I will go even further in the sense that I don't think we should have any illusions that this can work from inside the party. I do think we need independence, and I like explain why. But I also need to clarify that it's not enough to nominally be independent from the Democratic and Republican parties. It's also a question of what is the strategy you bring forth, and that is where I think some of the criticisms of the Green Party, unfortunately, are warranted, in the sense that it shows you that it's not, they are independent from the Democratic and Republicans nominally, in terms of, they run their own ballot line, but it's not about just ballot lines. It's about politics. Politics trumps everything. And when I say politics, I don't just mean who is running for election and so on, but the approach that movements take in order to win. Does the leadership of a given movement, whether it's a movement led through a city council office like mine, or a movement led through a labor strike action, or both, regardless of what kind of movement, or BLM, regardless of the kind of movement you're talking about, I think ultimately it brings up the question of what strategy you're going to use. And that strategy, in my view, it has to be a fighting strategy. And what I mean by fighting strategy is, first of all, understanding that capitalism and the forces that represent capitalism are not going to be on your side ever, ever, ever. You are not going to sweet talk the billionaires at BlackRock or Palantir into thinking that there should be a rent freeze for working class people in New York, or that the genocide will be ended. It is class war, because that is the nature of capitalism. Capitalism is a zero-sum game, and it is brutal warfare against the majority of the working class. The only question for the working class is, are we going to take that lying down, or that which is sort of, it's all literal and figurative aerial bombardment from the capitalist class to the billions of the majority, or are we going to fight back through sort of reverse class warfare? That is the only question. So I think that if the leadership of movements don't have clarity on that first point, then everything else starts to break down. And so in the case of Mamdani, I mean, he may well win the mayor election. Obviously, a lot is going to play out. Nobody should be as foolish as to predict any election results, certainly this much in advance. But you said correctly that Cuomo is actually far weakened. It's not clear that the Democratic establishment will, or figures in the Democratic establishment will see it in their own careerist interest to back him. They may not. I don't know. Eric Adams is certainly trying to discredit Mamdani and getting business interests on his side. But the point is, there is a lot of momentum for Mamdani, and he may win or he may lose. I don't know. But the point is, does the approach that he's bringing forward work? And that's where we need to clarify, what is the approach that Mamdani is bringing. So first of all, there are some elements that are different. Like you said, the fact that he is relentlessly bringing forward these demands, that is actually important, but it's not unique in the sense that that's exactly what we did. So it's not the first thing, but the reason, and the fact that his campaign is being talked about in the corporate media with absolutely no mention of what we did in Seattle, there's a reason for that. The reason is that for the ruling class, they don't want to give the example that we created, which was very clearly drawing the class lines. They would prefer to have, they don't like Mamdani. They're making it very clear, and he is being, he's going to be attacked even more so as the general election heats up. But the point is that they would, if the ruling class are to have an adversary, then they would much prefer an adversary like him, who is very clearly indicating that he wants to somehow square the circle, which is win these demands he's bringing forward, and yet not spoil his relations with the upper echelon Democrats and also with big business. I mean, just to give you some examples, he said on this ABC News interview after he won the primary that he wants to, that it was a contentious primary, but he wants to put that behind him. And he said, I want to bring all of New York together. well, that's a giveaway. With the best of intentions, if you think that your job is to bring, quote unquote, all of New York together, then you're not understanding the basics, because all of New York is what? All of New York is all the uber rich billionaires on the one end. It's a whole host of middle income people who somehow survive but are still struggling. And then a whole section of poor and working class people who are struggling to get by, many of whom are getting pushed out of the city. He talks about that too. But the point is, if you think that you're going to bring everyone together in a class neutral way, then it is intentionally or not, it is a misunderstanding of what it will take to win.
Well, let me play devil's advocate for a second, because there are people who will look at the media appearances that he's done and see his willingness to, stand his ground on issues which we know are, contentious in the mainstream elite media environments, when he could have done an easier answer. We've already talked about how this was a colossal loss for the idea of kind of Zionist baiting people out of office. All the people who've been APAC'd out of office in the last couple of years. He's withstood that, and not by running away from his commitment to the people of Gaza and the people of Palestine, but by, in fact, standing his ground and trusting his base, and trusting that the millions and millions of people who turned out in cities like New York to protest the genocide in Gaza could be his voting base. And so what do you say to folks who look at the clip like that I'm about to play and say, actually, his demonstrated track record has been a willingness to call out the distinctions between himself and the establishment, whether it's on Gaza, whether it's on our economic system, and that to the extent that he, puts out some pablum about how we're all going to come together, certainly you can't listen to this and think that he really means that includes the billionaire class. Let's take a listen.
Do you like capitalism?
No, I have many critiques of capitalism. And I think ultimately the definition for me of why I call myself a democratic socialist is the words of Dr. King decades ago. He said, call it democracy or call it democratic socialism, there must be a better distribution of wealth for all of God's children in this country. And that's what I'm focused on, is dignity and taking on income inequality.
What do you take from that? Do you still think that, I've got to play devil's advocate. Do you think that him saying in a MSNBC or CNN interview, I don't know which it was, that we're going to bring everybody together, should weight more than some of these other appearances that he's done?
I think what he's doing is what he's doing is trying to carve out a middle path, which in my view doesn't exist, which is sort of saying some things that mean a certain way, but then saying other things that might signal a different direction. And he's doing both things. And it is a little bit, I agree that it is quite confusing, because depending on which clip you listen to, you might get a different impression. But if you look at a lot of, sort of just to have build a statistical profile of the things that he's saying, then you can see that he's trying to send message from both sides. And that is where I feel that, again, I'm not I'm not impugning anyone's intentions, but saying that actually, if you believe that that's the case, then you're not going to win. You may win the election. When I say you may not going to, you will not win, is winning the demands that working people want. Because as you know, for me, election campaigns are not vanity campaigns for your personal career. It's about actually winning for working class people. So when I say win, I mean that. And so, just to give an example, in the same interview, he said, in the same CNN interview, he talked about how, Erin Burnett was asking him, if you talk about taxes on the rich, aren't they going to leave? This is the same trope. That's been used against me 1,000 times, and we still won the Amazon tax anyway. And he starts out with a very good answer. He always reminds the corporate media that actually, statistically speaking, the rich leave New York at 1/4 of a rate of that working class people leave, because it's unaffordability that forces people to leave, not that rich people are dying to leave New York. Rich people, love to live in Manhattan. But then he talks about how the rent freeze demand, and he tries to make a case that actually this is in the interest of the billionaires also, because as far as he knows, billionaires, the ones who do leave, they don't leave because of high taxes, but they leave because of they also have complaints about quality of life. And look, this is going to work for everyone. It's not. It's not. It doesn't matter how much objectively affordable rents might make lives better for everyone. I don't believe that it does. Rent freeze is actually in the interest of working class people. The uber rich are not going to like it. You know why? Because if you look at who owns residential housing in cities like New York, it is, and in fact, nationally and internationally at this point, the vast majority of residential rental housing is owned by massive corporations that, if you look at the major shareholders, it is the same companies, BlackRock, Geo, so on and so forth. These are the same companies. And who own major shares in those companies? It's the same billionaires and multimillionaires. So no, I'm sorry, a rent freeze in a direct sense is it's a class demand, because if it makes rents affordable for millions of people, it will take profits away from the billionaire class. Now, they don't get impoverished, but they are loath to let go of those profits. So no, it's not in their interest. And if you think that actually you can somehow sweet talk the billionaires into believing that rent freeze is in their interest, then I'm sorry, it's mind-boggling to me if anybody actually believes that, because every dollar for workers' wages or their standards of living, which includes housing affordability, it comes out of profits of the bosses. Capitalism is a zero-sum game. You're not going to somehow change that because you would like to believe that it is different. That is the case. The other example is, again, from the same interview in CNN. He talks about how he is against, because she was quoting a particular billionaire, Bill Rickman or something. I'm probably butchering his name, but some billionaire who lives in New York. And then he talks about how I disagree with him about having dismantled the diversity, equity, and inclusion program.
Yeah.
Ackman, yeah, that's right, Ackman. But then he says that it's actually, I don't agree with it, but not only because it's bad for the workers, but it's also bad for the corporation's bottom line. Come on now, come on. That is absolutely not.
Devil's advocate, and genuinely, I'm curious what you think of this. It feels to me not necessarily to be the case that he thinks, oh, this is going to be better for billionaires and it's good for billionaires to have good things, but that it's a rhetorical sleight of hand that you use to push back against this idea that things, if it's going to be so bad for the rich, then the rich are going to leave and we're going to end the glorious trickle-down economic benefits that we've been bestowed for the last, since the Reagan era. So let me give you an analogy, and I genuinely want to know what you think about us messaging this way. Like on the Bernie campaign, I think that we would do sometimes, and leftists, far and wide would do sometimes, is make the case that Medicare for all is good for business owners. We wouldn't say necessarily billionaires, but it's good for business owners because healthcare is one of the largest expenses, especially for small businesses. And that if that were no longer on the plate of business owners, if we're no longer their responsibility, then it would be easier for people to start new businesses without feeling like there's kind of like a cap on how many employees you can have before you have to have an obligation to pay for their healthcare. And obviously for all the reasons it's good for your health not to die when you get sick because you're poor, but also that there's obviously social mobility for workers who no longer have to have their healthcare applied to employment. So we would make both sides of that argument, right? But it wasn't because, we were like, prioritizing, Walmart for no longer having to pay for health insurance for their employees. It's a way to push back against the idea. It's a way to make business owners and big business look silly for opposing this thing in the first place, since there are these residual benefits to it. Like, why wouldn't you not want to have the responsibility of your employees' healthcare? I can see people reading Zohran Mamdani's pitch on CNN similarly. What do you make of that?
Oh, I'm sure a lot of people will be reading his pitch similarly. That's not new to me, but I think it is, in my view, it is not a rhetorical cleverness on his part, and it's not, like I said, it's not just about him. And I'm glad you brought up Bernie Sanders, and I would also bring up AOC and others as well as sort of parallel examples. Obviously, his record is somewhat new, although it's not entirely blank slate either. I mean, he was in the state legislature, and I do want to talk about what approach the DSA took in the state legislature as well, because it's part of this point that I'm trying to make, which is that actually it reflects a real difference in what they think about what is needed to win these victories for the working class. I mean, first of all, before I say anything else, I want to be clear. I hope that these demands can be won in New York. I hope he wins the election, and I hope he wins the demands in New York, because I care about the working class. I don't care, for me, it's not a sectarian question of just, it's not about tearing someone down because I have disagreements with them. For me, it is about being honest with the working class. So I am not speaking to Zohran Mamdani. I don't believe that he will agree with me, but I'm speaking to working class people who want to understand, just like you opened this show with, is that, what can we be hopeful about? What do we need to be sober about? So in that spirit, I'm approaching this in that spirit. And so one of the things I would say is that it's in my view, it is not rhetorical cleverness on his part or Bernie Sanders' part or AOC's part, where they try to sort of show this kind of this idea that, oh, when actually it's good for big business too, and you're just being silly. Well, first of all, that's not true. They are not being silly. Ackman is not being silly. He didn't become a billionaire because he is silly. Come on. Let's be serious. The billionaire class, I'm not saying that they became billionaires because they're intelligent. That's not true. They became billionaires because capitalism creates billionaires. But what I am saying is that capitalism is a system. Capitalism would not survive for a single day if the billionaire class was somehow perennially confused about what's in their interest. That's just not true. They know what's in their interest. And unfortunately for us, what's in their interest is clearly antagonistic to our interest. That is what I mean by saying that if you have leaders who keep trying to square this circle where somehow we can bring the two classes together, that means that the workers are going to lose out, because everything is stacked up against us under capitalism. The only way we can win is to upend the status quo of the balance of powers, which is always on the side of the capitalists. And what I will say is that far from being a rhetorical flourish, it is actually a reflection of what approach they will use. Again, like I said, let's leave intentions aside. We are not mind readers. Let's talk about the strategy itself. And so it is not a coincidence that Bernie Sanders and AOC have, again, Mamdani is not the first person to bring up demands and then speak in this way. I mean, there's a long precedence for that. AOC and Bernie Sanders are more recent precedents. That's why I'm using them, but they're far from alone. It's not a coincidence, in my view, that Bernie Sanders and AOC also use these types of rhetorics, and also they are also the people who have completely and utterly failed to stand up for working people on any of the demands that they claim to support, whether it is $15 an hour nationally, or Medicare for all, or student debt, or Bernie Sanders didn't exactly stand up for this, but just to mention what's important to the working class right now is ending the genocide and ending the tens of billions of dollars of military aid to Israel, fighting against Trump's horrendous budget cuts to Medicare and Medicaid. I mean, the Democratic Party as a whole has completely failed to do this, but the Democratic Party also was the party of genocide originally, and now the Republican, both are parties of genocide, but it was under Biden that it started. And despite all of Biden's broken promises, despite him being a genocidal president, both Sanders and AOC gave a ringing endorsement to Biden, and then they gave a ringing endorsement to genocidal Kamala Harris. What I'm trying to say is that what you call rhetorical flourishes, in my view, are not rhetoric, but a reflection of their underlying politics. And their underlying politics, I would describe as, they would like to win some things for working class people, but they are certainly not going to do it at the expense of their cordial relations with the Democrats. So it was not for nothing that AOC, in a moment of honesty, rare moment of honesty, increasingly rare these days, she said that if I had done, force the vote, you and I know what we're talking about. If I had done what the MAGA Congress members did, then it would have caused relational and reputational harm. She wasn't lying. That is 100% true. But the point is that she puts more premium on her relationships with the Democrats than she does to do what it takes to actually win. So and again, Mamdani is not the first person to have come up with fighting demands. Bernie Sanders did, AOC did, but they have won nothing. They've won absolutely nothing.
Yeah, I think the difference is, I'll speak for myself. What I'm struggling with is that there have also been these moments where he has faced reputational and relational harm and chosen that path, despite some arguments that maybe wasn't even the battle he should have picked. So most notably, we have the globalized to intifada stuff, which, I think of all the things you can kind of throw under the bus, there's a world where he said, that's not a slogan that I've used or I personally care for. He could have said that and the left would have probably stayed with them. Just like he said, I'm not for defund the police, even though his policies would in effect defund the police. I think most of the left just kind of let him have that one because they want him to win the election and they don't want him to create a whole media cycle around it. That being said, he chose to not throw globalized the intifada under the bus. And we saw the media cycle around it, and it's extremely heartening that he won despite that fact. But what I'm trying to say is, in the same way that Bernie's record of saying the unpopular thing at a tough time over the course of his career made so many of us feel like we could trust him, Zohran's moments of saying things that are very controversial among elite media and political figures that he didn't have to say puts the balance on the scales in the other direction of, is he going to sell out? No, he's willing to actually cause that relational harm. Now, I can hear myself in the example that I offered up Bernie Sanders, and of course, he ultimately has disappointed in these ways, but not before also, galvanizing a movement that arguably Zohran Mamdani has sprung from and curving the arc of history more in a direction of justice. So I know, me personally, that's what I'm struggling with. And when I say, dare I hope, it's because of these globalized intifada, frankly, moments where he seems to be willing to do what his ethics dictate, regardless of the impact, as opposed to the, hey, yeah, we're all going to come together now that I've won the election moments on CNN.
For me, it's a very important question, but I would frame this once again, and we have to be relentless about this, from the standpoint of working class people and what they have won or lost, not from the standpoint of these individuals. I don't give a shit about any of these individual public figures and their lives and whether they're happy or not and all that stuff. It's a question of what have they won for working people, because that is what they're there for. And so from that standpoint, the record is very clear. They haven't won. And so, yes, you're right. What is happening and what has been happening, and it's useful to sort of take a bird's eye view of the arc of history. What has happened for the last 50 years, especially since the era of neoliberalism and the globalization, the massive attacks on the labor movement and the gains won by the labor movement in the earlier decades, all of the pushback against militancy, and then just the whole era of militancy kind of dying out, really. And in its place, the emergence, and this was always the case in the labor movement, but much more ferociously so, much more emphatically so, the emergence of what I would call a business unionist leadership, union leaders who prefer to have collaboration with the bosses, with the Democratic Party, don't want to cross the line. So in that whole process, what has happened is that the whole, so that's mostly the kind of leadership that's on offer. But in the meanwhile, working class people have grown angrier and angrier, and there's a bubbling cauldron of anger underneath the surface, and it keeps coming out every so often. You saw the largest single day of protests through No Kings. You saw the George Floyd rebellion, which is the largest street protest movement in U.S. history. So you keep having these things, repeatedly happening. But in that context, when most of the leadership that's on offer is a selling out type of leadership, then what happens is, and this is the process that plays out, is that every time there's a bubbling insurgency from below, then even these business unionist type leaders, even the AOC type leaders, they are forced to pay some heed to it, because if they don't, it's at their own peril. So there's always this controlled explosion type of approach that's used. And so every so often we see where Bernie Sanders is willing to do this, but only so far. AOC is willing to do this, but only so far. And my question, again, because I said my starting point was what's in the interest of the working class, not these individuals. how many times are we going to tell the working class to keep going to that merry-go-round where there's yet another leader who's willing to go this far and no more? I mean, just to give you an example, yes, I mean, I strongly commend Mamdani for not backing down on the question of intifada, and we saw I hope you're able to play Kirsten Gillibrand's rant over it, but which was really shameful. I do commend him for that. But the thing is, this is not the first time we've seen this, Brianna. We saw AOC in March of last year. She described the situation in Gaza in a House floor speech as an unfolding genocide. And what was she doing a couple of months later at the DNC in Chicago? I was there. She said, Kamala Harris is tirelessly fighting for a ceasefire. Yeah. So she went on the DNC floor 2 months after calling what it was a genocide, and then uttering a bald-faced lie to corral working class people and the anti-war movement towards a genocidal candidate. That is what I'm talking about. So at the end of the day, yes, Bernie Sanders is willing to do this much. AOC is willing to do this much. No, but our assessment of that is not, oh, at least they're willing to do this much. No, our assessment is this type of controlled explosion approach is actually deadly against the working class and the anti-war movement, and we need leadership that will completely break from that idea and actually fight to end the genocide.
I would also say that, like, I feel like my job, my role, my assessment after doing this podcast for going on 5 years is to make clear the contradictions between the stated values of the left and the Democratic Party, whose job is not to advance those values or to be a resistance party to the Republicans, but to crush the left. And that's a really hard sell for a lot of people. And as we've discussed, Kshama, like, it's between force the vote and the Build Back Better and the tirelessly fighting and the railroad workers strike. There's been these moments that have accumulated that have made more and more people fundamentally disgusted with the Democratic Party in a way that might prompt the kind of break that I think that we need. And I've seen in the course of the opposition to Zohran Mamdani, more and more people being like, F the Democratic Party, like that kind of tweet, because he's, seems lovely and popular in the way that AOC seemed lovely and popular, and seeing the establishment go against them polarizes people. Now, an example of AOC, obviously, they got on her side, they put her on covers of magazines, they acted like she was one of them, and they were able to paper over that division. And then AOC, I would argue, declined to reopen the chasm and criticize her party at the key moments that would help to prompt the kinds of resistance to the Democratic Party that's necessary for there to actually be substantive change, given that, again, the Democratic Party's role is not making the world a better place, but in fact, creating a kind of controlled opposition against the Republican Party. That being said, I agree with you.
Yeah, and can I just say, I mean, in further evidence of what I'm saying, again, like I said, I don't want the working class of New York to not win. So if Mamdani were to get elected and then he were to actually build the kind of fighting movements that I'm talking about, I will be the first to celebrate that, again, because for us, it's not a sectarian question. It's a question of what can we win altogether, and speaking truthfully to working people about what strategies work and don't work. And so, again, like I said, it's not only that we can look at AOC and Bernie Sanders and decipher what will happen through this controlled explosion approach. It's also his own record, Mamdani's own record. I mean, he was on the New York State Legislature, and in fact, for the last few years, the New York DSA has had 8 positions in the New York State legislature. And it's not that they have not won anything, but if you look at having 8 positions of self-described socialists and what you should potentially be winning, it's nothing commensurate to that. And in fact, just to give a very concrete example, and it's not only about DSA even, it's certainly not just about him, it's not just about DSA, it's about this whole approach, is that there was a whole effort called Invest in Our New York, IONY, that they started, which the goals were fantastic. I mean, it's like the Amazon tax, just at the state level, the Amazon tax that we won in Seattle, and to fund affordable housing and other services and so on. And 100 different, I believe over 100 different organizations, including labor unions, other NGOs, including DSA and these DSA electeds, they were all supporting it. And they won some a small measure of victories, but overall they didn't actually win. And if you compare that to the scale of victories that we have won in Seattle, it is absolutely massive in terms of commensurate, in terms of how much leadership position we had. We had just one position, and most of the labor leadership actually were hostile to us. The way we won was by galvanizing the rank and file of the union movement, and then through that putting pressure on the labor leadership. And in fact, just last year and this year has been a fantastic example of what can be done through a fighting strategy, even without an elected position. Last year, the city council Democrats, I mean, keep in mind, I wasn't on the city council last year. They tried to undermine our $15 minimum wage, which is now over $20. And they tried to make a second tier permanent that was supposed to expire. And now that tier has expired. All workers are getting the same minimum wage, the ones who are on minimum wage. But there was an effort to deny over 100,000 of the poorest workers over $3 an hour. I mean, that is like, huge for them. It's a question of whether they can pay their rent or not. And these Democrats tried to do this. We defeated them even without a city council position, even without the labor leadership really pulling their weight. And this year, the same city council tried to dismantle part one of their effort. They're going to start part two now of their effort to dismantle the renters' rights that we won. Not only did we defeat them, Brianna, the Democrat who brought forward that bill, she resigned. We forced her to resign because she could not take the heat. And you know how we won that? Because we named and shamed the council members to their faces. We got that on the news media. We shut down the city. We forced them to shut down the in-person meetings. We forced them to go on Zoom. We took over city council chambers and held our own public rallies. That's the kind of confrontation it takes. And the Seattle Times editorial board, which hates my guts, because they love the Chamber of Commerce. They literally wrote, they're sending marching orders to the Democrats on the city council. They literally said, Sawant to city council nil, referring to the two victories we won between last year and this year. And they are rebuking the city council for bending to our pressure, saying you need to do the right thing. And by the right thing, they mean go ahead and pass the bill that dismantles the renters' rights. So I'm saying that with that type of confrontation, and even with far fewer people and no elected positions, we were able to win those victories. Yeah. And with 100 organizations, what have they won? So that comparison is important.
So let me ask you this, because people are saying, in fact, that Zohran's win is a repudiation of a kind of, not adversarial politics necessarily, but an adversarial tone that it has been adopted by what is described as like the Chapo Trap House left, or the David Sirota even left, in a series of tweets by some of these establishment gatekeeper journalist types. And I think it was the guy who's Fetterman's former chief of staff who was tweeting along these lines. And there are people who are saying, like, look, this is proof that if you play nice, you can have good things. That, they're not, I'm like projecting their argument more broadly, but the argument would go something like, Bernie Sanders said he was unwilling to shake people's hands and wish them happy birthday to build coalitions. But look at Zohran. He got all these cross endorsements that facilitated his win because he was willing to play nice with Brad Lander and the others. He has what I saw someone in the chat called like toxic positivity and smiling all the time. Like Fox News can't even get a frowning photo of him to smear him as an insane Muslim jihadist. Like and there's something to that. And so if someone were to say to you, Kshama, smile, babe, you've been successful in Seattle, but imagine how much more successful you would be if you had a kind of radical positivity aligned with your adversarial politics. I mean, has Zohran success in the way that he's caught on social media and all of those other kinds of things? What do you make of it all? Because I gotta me myself, I was a little rattled by it. I was like, oh, well, maybe I am too much of a pill. I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't have burned every bridge that I ever saw.
No, but yes, yeah, no. I'm glad you're asking that. It's just making me laugh, which is fun. It's always fun talking to you, Brianna. I really appreciate it. Whether or not somebody says, you need to smile more, and I've been told that, it's in my case, and it's actually in every case, it's also in Mamdani's case, it is defined by the class lines. Whether you realize it or not, that is where it's coming from. How people perceive you has everything to do with their own perceptions of the class divide and their own class allegiances, and oftentimes they may not even be conscious of it. Ordinary people, when ordinary people say, oh, you need to smile more, they're not even conscious of it. But as far as the big guns, all the democratic establishment people or the media people, when they say that, oh, he's so nice, he's smiling, they don't, it is not a class neutral question, because it's the whole idea of playing nice, and he is playing nice, which is what worries me. I mean, if you look at his statements, about how gracious Andrew Cuomo was when he conceded, you think I spoke to, and I mean, I've defeated all my opponents so far in elections. You think I spoke to anyone on the phone and said they were gracious? No.
Oh, you put their heads on a stake and put it outside the castle.
No,
warning
no.
for the
I mean, it is. But see, that's the thing, though. It's not about me. It's about what the working class needs, and the working class needs unambiguous fighters, not one more snake oil salesman who tells you you can have your cake and eat it too. It doesn't work that way, because this whole playing nice that you're talking about, it's not going to stop here. If you start on the playing nice route, then playing nice becomes your priority, and then you will start selling working people out. And conversely, if you decide that you do want to fight for working class people, then it doesn't matter how much you smile, they will see you as an adversary. Do you see what I'm saying? So for the ruling class, it's not about the smile. For the ruling class, it's about what you stand on. And can I just say, it's also a trope, and we should not, those of us who are actually on the left, we should not fall into this trope of, oh well, if you're fighting for the working class, you're not smiling enough, you need positivity. I actually completely reject that notion, because I have told by any number of working people, oh my God, you helped me to have hope. You helped me to be positive. Yeah. Your energy is contagious. Like everybody keeps telling me, I don't know how you find so much energy. And I hesitate to say these things because I don't want to talk about self. I hate that type of thing. However, the reason I'm mentioning this is that how people perceive you very much depends on their own class loyalty. So the working class that sees me as a fighter, they see me as a very positive person. But does the ruling class, does my opponent Adam Smith, do the warmongers see me as positive? Absolutely not. They want to crush me. So it's not a neutral thing. And if you try to become a neutral figure, then you will sell out the working class.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I have had a similar sort of experience. And in fact, when I get into these endless conversations about force the vote, and I recently had a guest on who was, brought up the Jimmy Dore of it all, right? And was being very critical of Jimmy Dore. And, as much as there have been moments in the past where I felt like I was the victim of one of his swings unfairly or whatever, it was always obvious to me that he galvanizes people precisely because he meets the gravity of the moment with the anger that it requires, right? And especially during the force the vote moment, it was during the pandemic. People were losing their health care. Like, people were actually dying by the millions. To be told not to be angry is to deny reality. And I appreciate that people have to have different tones for different groups and to get them all on the same page. And like, everyone's not going to be the Jimmy Dore. Everyone's not going to be radically optimistic like Zohran Mamdani, whatever. I am never going to be the person that tone polices the angry person who's angry for a very, very good reason. That being said, I do feel like we need to moot the factors that also contributed to his success. And while I feel like the but-for cause of his winning was, yes, he's an extremely strong candidate, extremely articulate, extremely high emotional and political intelligence, all of those things. If it weren't for ranked choice voting and the fact that Cuomo was cartoonishly evil, I still don't think he would have won. And I think that the social media embrace of him, independently of his own video output and his own video output going viral, I think that happened precisely because people felt permission to hope and believe and vote for him because of ranked choice voting, that it wasn't going to end up throwing the election to somebody bad, and the kind of don't rank Cuomo of it all was enabled by the fact that he was a historically evil character. And so I also don't want to overstate the idea that just like being radically optimistic can make you win a more immoral election. There were other really specific structural realities in this race that admit, again, I don't mean this to discount Zohran's end of it as well, and the 50,000 volunteers and the infrastructure and all of the amazing things that were done to make this happen. But I want us to be clear-eyed about that as we try to replicate these results in other places going forward. Kshama, you've mentioned a couple of times this horrible screed that Kirsten Gillibrand went off on. Kirsten Gillibrand, for those who have forgotten, was really the Me Too senator who led the ouster of Al Franken for a photograph in which he was going like this to a woman who was asleep on a trip that he was on, and argued that Cuomo should step down at the time that he was found by the New York DOJ of sexually harassing, was it 12 or 13 women? We just had Lindsay Boylan on the show talking about her experiences. She was the first one to come out and accuse Andrew Cuomo of sexual harassment. Despite all of that, she has not only declined to congratulate, acknowledge, endorse Zohran Mamdani in his win, she also went on a whole Islamophobic screed. Let's take a listen to that.
Good morning. Thank you for taking my call and question. I wanted to ask two very pertinent questions about the threats facing the Jewish community, unfortunately, from Zohran Mamdani. There was a bill that I was reading about that, unfortunately, he wants to target synagogues and Jewish institutions which donate to nonprofits, which are medical institutions like United Hatzalah and Magan David Adom, which is like the Jewish Red Cross. So how do we make sure that Jewish institutions are protected from his plans to punish and fine our institutions which fundraise these medical nonprofits, which do work both here in the United States and in Israel and other countries in the world? And also, how can we hold Mr. Mamdani accountable for his glorifying association of Hamas and other terror bombings of the Intifada in 1990s, where over 1,000 Jewish Israelis were killed, to his revisionist Holocaust knowledge, to the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, where Jews were mass exterminated and faced threats? He compared when Jews were killed to when Jews fought back against Nazis. It's quite despicable. I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you for your call. There's a lot in there, Senator, some of which may be inaccurate. So I don't know. I can't fact check everything in real time. But do you know any of that to be inaccurate or accurate, including the original premise that he would somehow target synagogues if they were contributing to groups like Hatzalah, ambulance services, in a way that he could hurt the synagogues? I just don't want to give out information that's false, but I also don't want to shrink from information that's true.
Well, the caller is exactly the New York constituents that I've spoken to that are alarmed. They are alarmed by past public statements. They are alarmed by past positions, particularly references to global jihad. This is a very serious issue because people that glorify the slaughter of Jews create fear in our communities. The global intifada is a statement that means destroy Israel and kill all the Jews. So these are the kinds of things that if Mr. Mamdani is elected our mayor, we'll need to assure all New Yorkers that he will protect all Jews and protect houses of worship and protect funding for not-for-profits that meet the needs of these communities. Those are the things he'll have to do as our mayor.
He would certainly say that he has committed to protecting all Jews in New York as mayor of New York. Do you dispute? Do you doubt that?
Well, one of the issues I did talk to him yesterday was exactly this issue, and he has agreed to work with me on this and to protect all residents. So this is something I care deeply about, and so I will be an advocate on these issues. These are things that I think are important to New Yorkers, and I will work with him when he gets elected, if he gets elected, to make sure everyone is protected. I also, on the federal level, work to get resources for all our religious sites in the state and in the city. I lead the letter for funding for I lead the letter for the funding to protect synagogues and churches and temples and places of worship across our city and state. And these are things that he has assured me in my one conversation that he will protect everyone. But I understand why people are concerned because of past statements. And so this is just an issue that I will work with him on for sure.
I just feel compelled to say we can find no evidence that he has supported Hamas or has supported violent jihad, as that caller was asserting. Can you?
Again, Brian, I don't have all the data and information, and I've never sat down with Mr. Mamdani. So I've asked to have that meeting. I'm going to have that meeting. We will talk through all these things. He can tell me his views of the world, and I can learn them firsthand. I think the reference that I had read was global intifada specifically, which has very serious meanings that are violent and destructive. So
which he says, and I pressed him on this on the show on Monday, but which he says are not calls for violence because intifada is a much broader term involving all kinds of uprisings and resistance and things like that. So I just want to be clear about how at least he defines it. And maybe he needs to be more clear. I don't mean this, I don't mean that. He did say here that he didn't want to be the word police, even as the mayor of New York, if he's elected. But I do also want to be clear that he said he does not support violent intifada. Is that fair?
So Brian, I didn't hear your exchange with him, but if I was speaking to him directly, I would simply say that is not how the words are received. And it doesn't matter what meaning you have in your brain, it is not how the word is received. And when you use a word like intifada to many Jewish Americans and Jewish New Yorkers, that means you are permissive for violence against Jews. It is a serious word. It is a word that has deep meaning. It has been used for wars across time and violence and destruction and slaughter and murder against the Jews. It is a harmful, hurtful, inappropriate word for anyone who wants to represent a city as diverse as New York City with 8 million people. And I would be very specific in these words, and I would say you may not use them again if you expect to represent everyone ever again, because they are received as hateful and divisive and harmful.
All right, it goes on for a little longer than that, but I want to give you an opportunity to respond.
Yes, I think that first of all, just on the question of intifada, absolutely, Zohran Mamdani is absolutely right. And Kirsten Gillibrand is not only completely wrong and ahistorical, it is absolutely shameful for her to have said what she said. I mean, I'm not surprised because, she's yet another Democrat, but it is still jarring to hear the intensity with which she is saying all these lies, because in reality, and I hope a lot of people who are watching this already know, but if you don't, intifada is referring to it. The word comes from the first struggle that happened from the Palestinian people. It was a mass struggle that started in 1987, so late 80s, early 90s, to end the siege and occupation by the Israeli state. Extremely inspiring. It was a mass struggle which included mass demonstrations, strike actions by working class people, by trade unions, which actually also elected committees for that struggle, during that intifada. So it is not only not this type of violent, some sort of violent attack on anybody that she is making it out to be. It is actually a very positive development. And intifada, literally it means uprising or revolution, and it's a very positive thing. If you are a working class person or otherwise are against oppression, against colonialism, against capitalism, then it's a positive phrase for you. And in fact, it also includes, if you talk about intifada as a broader term, as Mamdani correctly was talking about, it also includes more recent developments, like, for example, the protests in Iran for women's rights. Also includes the what was called the dignity strike on 21st May by Palestinian people, which was actually not pro-Hamas. It was actually pro a better approach there to fight against the Israeli state and how to change the balance of power and so on. It's a struggle for liberation. So it's a very, very positive thing. Now, outside of that, the reason I was thinking about it, the reason it even caught my attention was that Mamdani has been either receiving positive statements even from Chuck Schumer or Hakeem Jeffries and so on. And even Kirsten Gillibrand, actually, before she went on this rant, she said something like, don't quote me on this, but something like, I had a lovely conversation with him or something like that with Mamdani. Mm-hmm. And then she went on this rant. The reason it concerns me is that not that I think Mamdani said something wrong about intifada. As I said, he should absolutely be defended for what he said, which is a defense of intifada and not distancing himself from it. But is that if you are actually going to defend the Palestinian people, stand up for intifada, stand up for uprising of oppressed people, then that is completely contradictory to then making peace with the Schumers and the Jeffries and the Gillibrands of this world. And that is where I feel like, so again, you hear mixed messages. So on the one hand, that's true. But then he has also, I think, many times said that anti-Semitism is rising. And of course, anti-Semitism has no place in any decent society, nor does Islamophobia or any other kind of bigotry. And, this is Pride weekend. So we are also talking about ending homophobia. And as a socialist, as a revolutionary socialist, I stand for a society against all oppression. So any kind of this bigotry is horrible. But you have to look at the context in which this is happening, because what is rising is an anger against Zionism. What is rising is an anger against US imperialism, against the genocide, against the mass slaughter, which now is over 400,000 over 400,000 Palestinians, according to the medical journal, The Lancet. So I think it is, in my view, problematic not to lead with that. That is what is the central political event that's unfolding. It's not the rise of anti-Semitism. It's the rise of, it's the continuation of the genocide, 20 months, and a rise of opposition to that. 53% of Americans saying we're against the Israeli state. That's what's happening. And I don't think we should be conflating these things, because that is precisely what the Zionists want to do. They want to conflate anti-Zionism and anti-war movements with anti-Semitism, and we have to completely reject that.
Yeah, I confess, there was the news that he was starting the sort of hate crime, anti-Semitism, sort of a task force. I don't want to mischaracterize it. And there's a part of me that's like, okay, he's saying this because he has to win. He has to have something that proves his bona fides as not an anti-Semite, as the whole world crashes down against him and tries to prevent him from actually turning this primary win into an actual mayoralty. But I also agree with you. Like, I've been of two minds through this. Look, especially before the primary, I'm not interested in saying anything negative, because I think Cuomo needs to lose, and it's good that he wins, like, obviously.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And like, I'm very cautious of doing or saying anything that would diminish that outcome, like that would take away from that outcome. But just between us girls, there was a little bit of a recalibration that had to be done around his initial do you believe Israel has a right to exist answer, before he landed on what I think is a very effective answer of, it already exists. It is a state, but states don't have a right to exist, but it should exist as a democracy, as a state with equality and not an apartheid state, is a good one, because then there's no comeback other than, no, actually, I think apartheid states have a right to exist. So but there was a little bit of negotiation before we landed there. And I agree with the pushback on Colbert that he gave, being a little like, yes, I agree that anti-Semitism is a real and rising problem. There does still feel the need to concede these points, which, again, I understand in this electoral context. I understand in the audience, in the space that he's in at Colbert. But it is a little jarring given, today's news, the current news about the Israelis admitting that they're just sniping people at these mercenary aid checkpoints, that there was a story about them putting oxycodone in the bags of food they're distributing. I mean, the level of horror is beyond my, frankly, heart's ability to contain. And at the same time that it's falling out of the headlines, because we're talking about everything else, including Zohran Mamdani, but Iran and, the whole world's falling down around our ears. So I take your point. I don't know what to really do with that, but to sit on it for the time being. But
I think again, that's why we have to approach it from, what are the needs of the anti-war movement? What are the needs of the working class? And sort of set aside individuals. And that's where I think it is, like I said, the balance is, yes, it's really important that he didn't distance himself from Intifada. But also, again, that's what I'm giving you examples of how you're sort of, you have a person who's speaking from both sides, and that's an indication of something, that it's an indication that this person is open to, open to shaving off things that he's been talking about in order to make peace with the establishment. And I know you said he's running for office. Yes, that's true. So am I. At the press conference where we announced our congressional race, probably the first question that the media wanted to ask me was, don't you think that this is anti-Semitic for you to say, like, basically what they're saying is, the prominent demand on my campaign platform is ending the genocide and ending U.S. military funding, all U.S. military funding for the Israeli state. They immediately try to smear me as an anti-Semite. And my response to that was not that anti-Semitism is rising. My response to that was exactly what I said to you a few minutes ago, which is, anti-Semitism is a scourge on humanity, and we have to have zero tolerance for that. at the same time that we have to have zero tolerance for Islamophobia or any other kind of bigotry, because no bigotry, no oppression has any room in any decent society. Whether or not you agree with me specifically about socialism is not even the question. If you think we need a decent society, then of course it has to be free of oppression and bigotry and religious, like anti-ethnic and anti-religious kind of sentiment. Absolutely. But it goes to the heart of the matter. If when he was in one of the articles, it's reported, I'm quoting from one of the articles, where he was, I think also Gillibrand, saying he needs to denounce intifada and all that. The article says Mamdani has responded to the criticism by maintaining he would be a mayor for all New Yorkers and is committed to protecting his Jewish constituents against rising anti-Semitism. Absolutely, I share his commitment 100% to protecting anybody who is facing any kind of bigotry, including anti-Semitism. However, when he says, I am going to be a mayor for all New Yorkers, that's where, again, it's like an oxymoron kind of sentence, because New Yorkers also includes Zionists and pro-genocide people. Seattle, the 9th Congressional District, includes, obviously it's not just Seattle, but other cities also. It includes people who are pro-genocide, including my opponent, Adam Smith, who is a general for genocide. I don't represent them, and I don't make any bones about it, because I don't want to go down in history in any way, shape, or form having given any credence whatsoever to what is happening right now. The overarching event of our times is the Holocaust of the 21st century. And if we can't even have the left to even hold the line on that very clearly, then we have to ask the question, how can the anti-war movement succeed on that basis? Because ultimately that's the question. How can we end the genocide?
I think that's a really important point. And again, I hope that we see an evolution. Next time everyone wants a piece of him now. He's getting invitations to go everywhere. I hope next time maybe there's increasingly room for him to say, yeah, the focus should be on the 400,000 Palestinians killed. The focus should be X, Y, and Z. And I hope that he gets those opportunities as he is the presumptive nominee increasingly, because he's already been able to do quite a bit of good, I would argue, messaging-wise, with the visibility he's had so far. I want you to respond to this clip of Charlemagne the God talking about Zohran Mamdani on The Breakfast Show. Zohran Mamdani did an interview on The Breakfast Show that went really well, as evidenced by the fact that now, even when he's not there, he's got Charlemagne the God doing marketing for socialism. Take a listen.
It's crazy to me how socialism is such a dirty word, man, because all socialism is where, they want to reduce the gap between the rich and the poor, and they want to make sure everybody has access to their basic necessities. And, when government intervention is needed for somebody to, have those basic necessities, then it can happen, whether it's healthcare, education, housing, just aiming to improve the overall well-being of citizens. That is what socialism is. That's why I like when Mamdani uses the word affordability, when he says, let's talk affordability. And I said that to him when he was here. I'm like, Democrats can come up with all types of other language, right? They'll say pregnant person and all this other goofy stuff. How come they can't come up with a better way to talk about socialism? Because people try to demonize socialism, but when you actually look under the hood to what, it is, hell yeah, you would want your basic necessities dealt with.
Right. And as I understood it, or as I read it, it does, like you said, it closes the gap, but it also gives the people more of a voice. Is that correct too?
Oh, I don't know. I just know. I'm just talking about the financial aspect of it. I don't know.
Okay. Shout out to the woman at the end who is also making a point about the kind of like the democratic equality aspects of socialism, even if Charlemagne hasn't gotten that far in his lesson plan. But what do you make about this? And specifically the way that the term affordability has really been latched on to folks, including some people in the center on the right, who in the wake of Zohran's win, even though they hate him and they think he's a Islamist, whatever that means, and all of this other stuff, are pointing to his halal cart ad and saying, yeah, this is how you win. You talk about kitchen table issues. You talk about affordability. And affordability has really become this buzzword. They tried to make abundance happen, but affordability is maybe the fetch that actually is going to stick, to quote Mean Girls.
Yeah, I think it has a lot to do with, Charlemagne's, again, I'm not a mind reader, but overall, if you look at the response to Mamdani's victory from traditional Democratic Party supporters, I think a lot of that also has to do with the fact that the Democratic Party's approval rating is in the toilet.
Yeah.
Hardly anybody has talked about that since Mamdani's victory, but that's a fact.
Yeah.
So the reception that Mamdani is getting, I really appreciated you, Brianna, talking about the electoral calculus also, just in terms of, Andrew Cuomo being completely discredited, ranked choice voting, all of that. And then the other part of this is this. I mean, politically, why is it that the Democratic Party establishment even feels like, even for a moment, to give any traction to working class demands or to affordability, is because they are in absolute disarray, and they need to figure out something or the other. And so, the fact that they are making some overtures towards that should not be a surprise. It should be a recognition, for us. We should understand that well, for them, it's a recognition of, okay, we got to do something here, guys. It's just we're in such bad shape. But the truth is, and second point, yes, I'll agree with you completely that Zohran Mamdani has actually, like I said before, and I've said repeatedly, it's really important that he has been relentless in bringing forward his affordability demands, including the increased minimum wage and free transit and so on. He has never shied away from that so far. And all of that is important. But you know who else was relentless about affordability demands? It was Bernie Sanders. So my question is not so much, it's not at all, not only so much, it's not at all to malign any individual, but to ask, how many goes on this merry-go-round are we going to have where you have this new kid on the block that raises those demands, but then is not willing to do what it will take? And what it will take, like I said, it's not just about running independent in name. It's about declaring war on the Democratic Party. And you know why? Because the Democratic Party is one of the parties of capitalism, and it is a specific obstacle to having any progress, because it's like, I've been quoting Chomsky recently because I love this quote. He said, the smart way to keep people passive and obedient is to strictly limit the spectrum of acceptable opinion, but allow very lively debate within that spectrum. That is a perfect description of the Democratic and Republican Party, because they are both parties of capitalism. They are both parties of war and imperialism. But as long as you see them sort of being against each other and trying to win against each other, then you think that there is one, at least one party is on your side. And so as long as you have a newer and newer incarnation of individuals who are selling you that same idea that, okay, the Democratic Party can be reformed, and here's a new guy who's talking about these demands. And granted, you don't have too many of them. Yes, most of the Democratic Party is so decrepit and so completely out of touch with working class lives that these things do stand out. A Mamdani does stand out, a Sanders or an AOC do stand out. However, ultimately, to what will it take to actually win? I mean, the working class cannot put food on the table, cannot put a roof over their heads, cannot pay their medical debt off on the basis of Sanders raising those demands but winning fucking nothing, AOC raising those demands and winning fucking nothing. So that's what I'm talking about. How many more goes at this merry-go-round are we going to have where we have leader upon leader not understanding or not being willing to do, even if they do understand, what it will take? And so that's why I'm saying it's not only independent in name, it's about understanding what it will take. And the reason it takes declaring war on the Democratic Party and the Republican Party is that they are both representatives of capitalism. And if you think that you can use one against the other, then you're completely missing the story. Because the Democratic Party, and we saw this with Sanders 2 times in 2016 and 2020, we saw this with AOC, what the Democratic Party will crush any effort towards doing anything for the working class. At this moment, for them, it is purely of electoral calculus, because they are in tatters. They need to win the midterms. The elections are coming up. And so can I just to clarify, I mean, it's not just about what doesn't work. It also is about what does work. I think it is helpful.
I just want to point out that I asked Zohran about this when he was on the show a couple months ago. And I specifically asked him about you and your strategic perspective. And so I wanted to give you an opportunity to listen to that clip and respond to it if you're willing in real time. And then maybe that's a good jumping point to further elaborate on how you feel. I also just want to say that if you haven't already liked this stream, I don't live stream often, so the algorithm really kicks my butt these days. I'm trying to turn that around. So I see almost 1,000 of you are in the chat. If you can, and only like 300 or so have actually hit the like button. So if you go ahead and do that, more people will be able to see this conversation. I also want to flag that we're going to pivot after I show this video into talking more about Kshama's race in Seattle. Because if you are excited about Zohran and you're excited about the possibilities of Zohran in New York, and everyone's like, well, I'm going to go enjoy my DSA chapter and try to do this all over the country, it's worth noting that there are ongoing races with people who have demonstrated even more of a commitment over a longer period of time to these kinds of issues and these kinds of values. And we should be keyed into those as well. So let me play this clip. I'm going to do it as a little bit faster than it happened, just so that we aren't wasting too much time just replaying it. But I think a lot of folks didn't catch this because it was at the end of the interview. And also not everybody knows that I actually did interviews Zohran within the context of this campaign cycle, in addition to twice earlier years ago when he was doing the taxi cab advocacy and all of that sort of stuff. So let's take a listen. And feel free to tell me to stop, Kshama, if you want to chime in at any point along here. In your politics for a second, what your feelings are about politics in general in this moment, the Democratic Party's sort of response. That was awful. Curious if we could step back from New York politics for a second, what your feelings are about politics in general in this moment, the Democratic Party's sort of response or lack thereof to the whirlwind that has been the first month of the Trump administration. There has been, in my observation, an increasing openness to people who are fed up and think that they're the kind of inside-outside strategy, the idea that kind of the squad could take over the Democrats from within, is not looking great. It's not going well. And people are increasingly invested in third parties. I've seen people pushing DSA and people within DSA being more open to the idea that there needs to be more involvement with third parties as opposed to trying to run candidates within the Democratic Party. There's people who push back against that, obviously saying, well, that's going to be an even harder task. I do wonder what you make of it all and if there are kinds of resistance or strategies that you would like to see deployed by the left in the face of what has been a really scary month.
You know, I think people are fed up with the politics that they're being told to be satisfied with. And I can see that in friends. I can also just see that in New Yorkers that I've spoken to who are unwilling to simply surrender to the reality of a Republican trifecta, because what they understand is what all of us understand, which is that power is not simply technical. Power is something that you can build. Power is something that you can contest for the narratives that underpin these majorities, because too often it seems that the Democratic response has been, there's not much we can do here. And we know that Donald Trump cares about one thing more than most, which is ratings and popularity. And we have to show ourselves willing to actually contest the narrative that is being put forward and to showcase the working class Americans who are being stolen from in this moment, because that is also the prospect of us building out a larger opposition to this moment. And I've actually been quite heartened, honestly, with what Bernie has been doing in this moment and going, to Americans in the hearts of Republican districts to make the same case that he would be making in the heart of a left district. And that's this fight against an oligarchy-based system. That's this fight against income inequality. And that's this belief that actually we can have a very different politics. And I think that whatever we do in this moment, it has to show the hunger for a different kind of politics. It has to show a willingness to fight and, frankly, being unwilling in any way to simply surrender and wait for a midterm, because there are too many people we will lose if that is our only approach to getting through this time.
Yeah, Zohran, I'm a little conflicted on this one. I remember I've been watching, obviously, Bernie at these events, and like the one I watched this one in Iowa, and it was very familiar to me. I remember covering him there in that auditorium when I was working for The Intercept. And I remember writing up these pieces explaining how well he was received in parts of the country that the Democratic Party had given up on, and which the Democratic pundit class insisted would never accept, a cranky old socialist from Vermont. And I believe that is true. And I think it's evidenced by the overflow rooms and, all of that. That being said, it also feels like frustrating to see Bernie do this sort of thing.
Life insurers put life into the things you live for.
Sorry, I should get ad free.
No problem.
And not over the course of the last 4 years, and not have this sort of oppositional energy against Joe Biden, despite he and Kamala Harris being such significant recipients of oligarch money themselves. Kamala Harris being the number one recipient of billionaire money, as was Joe Biden back in 2020. And the dangers that are presented in both parties when that happens. Why it is that we have two parties that are completely resistant to policies like Medicare for all, and I would argue even the $15 minimum wage, because I don't think it's an accident that Joe Biden wasn't able to successfully achieve that. So, is this a good messaging and a good effort, but one that ultimately is designed to lead people back toward a Democratic Party that has no intention of doing anything about the oligarchy that Bernie Sanders in this moment is so accurately calling out? And look at his face. He's so tired of me. I'm sorry. I was trying to be nice about it, but he was like, "Oh Lord, here she go." Sorry. It's my job.
No, don't apologize. That is I would have a thing to say to you if you hadn't done that.
Okay, here we go. Is the fact that the Democratic Party is so anemic right now in its response to Elon Musk and Donald Trump related to the fact that it cannot really make an argument about billionaire donations, because it's got J.B. Pritzker at the DNC talking about how I'm a good billionaire, actually, and new DNC chair Wickler coming out to say his first notable quotable being, there's good billionaires, actually, don't be so hard on them. I'm paraphrasing, obviously. And so I don't know. What would you say to the kind of Bernie folks who are disaffected and who look at what he's doing now and say kind of too little too late, you just want me to be a Democrat again?
I think Bernie's North Star is more than just bringing people into the Democratic Party or keeping people within the party. I know where people's frustration comes from, and it's a frustration that is a reflection of having felt let down, rightfully so, over many, many years. I think where I differentiate is that I don't think these positions are fixed. I don't think the nature of the party is one that has to be the same over the next few years. I think we're in a moment where there's a battle for the soul of the party. And I do believe that there is a path to build a vision in New York City, but also in many other places across the country, where to be a Democrat does not have to be synonymous with that bankruptcy of leadership, but rather it can be fulfilling the things that actually made so many people want to be Democrats in the first place. And for me, I think Bernie has been able to straddle those worlds. And I think now what we actually have to show for me to make this argument is to live up to those promises and deliver them. Because for a long time, it's just been a battle of rhetoric. And what's so exciting about when you're running in New York City is that you actually have the ability to deliver on these kinds of things. And so often, I've heard from many of my colleagues about the fact that the same trifecta that we have in DC, we have a Democratic trifecta in New York State. We have a Democratic mayor, a Democratic city council. This is our chance to actually show that we mean what we say. And so that's what I'm trying to build.
Even with what I'm sure you've observed of, and obviously seen reported on, of the corruption in Albany, even looking at what someone like Kshama Sawant was up against with a full Democratic city council in Washington state, even with seeing what happened to the statewide Medicare for All bill in California with unanimous Democratic assembly or city state, whatever, I guess state assembly. Alex Calvert came on the show years ago and tried to explain why they also voted down Medicare for All. Even the Democratic Party's big plan post 2020 was ostensibly, we'll get it in California and then it'll migrate by osmosis to the rest of the country once it's been proved positive in the largest state in the union, the most populous state in the union. I mean, I have seen enough of these kinds of examples to not have much confidence in Democratic majorities yielding progressive results or even moderate Democratic results. Do you really? I mean, I can see the mayor's office being different and stand alone. And so this is not an indictment of your project that you're.
No, I don't take it as. I mean, I think this is, despite the name, I take this as this is good faith contesting of the question. If I didn't have hope and belief, then I wouldn't be doing this. And I think the place that I get it from, it is the figures that we've talked about. But I also think back a little earlier in New York City municipal history, and I think about someone like Fiorello LaGuardia and what was possible under his mayorality. And so much of what we love and enjoy about New York City, so much of the sense of public goods, was something that he made a reality for New Yorkers. And he also had an incredible nickname, which was Little Flower, which is also the name of a great cafe in Astoria, if anyone ever wants to come by. But my point being is that there are enough examples for me that keep me committed to this work. I will not try and contest that there are more examples of the city we deserve than the one that we've been denied, but there are enough. And I think that that's our charge, that if we truly do believe, and when we are faced with these kinds of questions and this kind of frustration, it's our responsibility to deliver. And that's why I'm just as excited about the next 4 months of running as I am to actually be the mayor, because I want to be held to the standard that we're running on right now. I want people to come up to me in the street and be like, why is my rent not yet frozen? Where is my free bus? Because that ultimately, that is what speaks to people, is whether you can actually deliver. And I think it speaks to both people who don't see themselves in the Democratic Party. It speaks to people who don't see themselves voting at all. And it speaks to people who have been, but are starting to question whether there's a utility to it. And that's what I'm excited to actually deliver for.
Okay.
I'm glad you played that. Yeah, I have a lot to say, if you don't mind.
Hit me. The floor is yours.
No, and it's not going to. I don't think you're going to disagree, and also it's along the lines of the questions you were asking him. It's on the same theme. I mean, let me start by saying, he says it is a battle for the soul of the party, the Democratic Party. Can I just say, the soul of the Democratic Party is pure evil. That is not the battle that the working class should be invested in or are even interested in. The working class are interested in addressing their needs and the fact that their lives have become more and more miserable in this evil system of capitalism. And the reason the Democratic Party is not a route to achieving those things, even with the best of intentions, is again, to your point, you talked about how they have not fought Trump. I mean, the reality is, not only have the Democrats shown that they would rather let Trump win, someone they called fascist and an existential threat, than make even mild rhetorical concessions to working people just in order to win the election, even lying to their teeth. They were not willing to do that. And you know why? Because they don't want to be on the hook for that. So they don't want to be on the hook for any kind of working class demands. And that is why Kamala Harris made no promise. There were any number of political pundits who said, oh, if she would only say that she'll do something for the ceasefire, if she only say that she might do something for 15, she could win the election. And they were dead right. Yes, she would have won had she said even some lies about that. But the reason they didn't even want to lie about that, about specific demands, is that once you do that, then you're on the hook, and Mamdani is going to be on the hook if he wins. But the Democratic establishment, the Democratic elite, don't want to be on the hook for that, because they don't represent the working class. They represent capitalism. If we don't get that very, very simple and fundamental reality, then we are again and again and again going to go down the wrong path. The Democratic Party, not only did they show that they would rather let somebody they call an existential threat win against them, they would much rather burn the party to the ground before they will allow any working class agenda to win to their party. They have shown this again and again. They are completely discredited. Their approval ratings are in the toilet, and yet they are happy to go down that road. What they would like, of course, what they would like, and what the ruling class would like, is for the Democratic Party to have some higher credibility and yet sell out the working class. But at this moment, that's not quite working out for them, because things have gotten so bad, and also, consciousness is on the rise and so on. And so, just to give an example of why they are not fighting Trump. Do you know why they're not fighting Trump? Because the things that they have disagreements with Trump, yes. But when it comes to the Trump tax cuts for the rich, Biden didn't end those tax cuts. He continued them every step of the way. Biden oversaw the start of the genocide. Biden presided over sending tens upon tens of billions of dollars of weapons, and Democrats like Adam Smith, my opponent, made sure all the Democrats were in line and they were voting. You also saw AOC
the Iran nuclear deal as well is something that is a status quo that they maintained through the Biden presidency.
Yeah. I mean, Hillary Clinton, when she ran her Democratic primary, she said that, my first priority is to go after Iran or something like that. I'm not exactly quoting, but I'm paraphrasing. And same with Kamala Harris. She said the biggest threat to the US is Iran. And the same thing is with Trump tax cuts for the rich. The same thing is true for all the brutal, eye-watering budget cuts against working class people, and especially the cuts to Medicare and Medicaid that he's trying to do. See, this way, they are actually happy. There's a whole section of the ruling class and certainly the Democratic elite. They are happy for Trump to do these attacks because that way they can have their cake and eat it too. You can blame Trump for doing that, but as far as their primary responsibility, which is to represent the interests and the greed of the billionaires, they're achieving that too, because this has been the dream of the billionaire class. They are anytime the working class wins any substantive victories like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, which is only won through strike action and militant action, they are forced to concede, but then they hate it, and every moment after that they are trying to dismantle it. So they are happy enough to let Trump dismantle all of that. And so in reality, if there was an actual challenge, not an AOC or a Bernie Sanders, because they have not actually challenged. In fact, they've done the opposite. They have now fully capitulated to the Democratic Party's agenda. But if there was, hypothetically speaking, a real challenge, a working class challenge, an anti-war challenge inside the Democratic Party, which suppose if you imagine that they did all the things that AOC refused to do, take on battle against Nancy Pelosi, refuse, hold the vote, and force a vote on Medicare for all. And by the way, Ash Kalra prevented a vote from happening. CalCare, Medicare for all in California was never brought to a vote. This is what the Democrats do. They never have it on their record because they don't allow the vote to happen in the first place, because then nobody can say, hey, you voted against Medicare for all. That's their strategy. And so if there was an actual group of people inside the Democratic Party who did all the things that people thought AOC was going to do and never did, Sanders was going to do and never did, you know what would happen? It would lead to a split in the Democratic Party. Unfortunately, a lot of genuine people have this idea that it's somehow easier or better to do that, sort of push the agenda in the Democratic Party than starting a new party. But the problem is that's not true. It's not that the Democratic Party is an asset for the working class. In reality, the machinery of the Democratic Party is always used against the working class. And that's why I think it's not only the difference in that, Mamdani is running through Democrats and I have been an independent. It's also about revolutionary socialism. If you look at what Mamdani is saying, a lot of what he's saying, including in the CNN interview with Erin Burnett, he talked about how if he became mayor, he would hire the best and the brightest to manage the city in a very good way. That is all language of somebody who I would call a social democrat, where they're trying to be or selling themselves as, I'm not against capitalism, but I will be the best administrator for capitalism. Whereas
I hear that, but I do have to push back that it's hard to characterize him that way when in the interview he says, I'm against Well, let me not say, he didn't say I'm against capitalism. He said, I have
I also want to talk about Seattle, but since you brought up in that segment, but lots of social democrats say they don't like capitalism. That's nothing new. That's not the issue. The issue is what approach are you using in order to push back against capitalism? Are you saying that we need to reduce inequality and sort of all of that political worldview then influences how much you are going to take on battle with the Democratic Party? And what I'm trying to say is that me being a revolutionary is not a coincidence and something separate from the approach I have used. It is because I am a revolutionary, because I think capitalism needs to be overthrown and that we need a revolution. It is because of that clarity that when I go into City Hall or if I were to go into US Congress, I would understand that I cannot make nice with the Democrats because the Democratic Party is a party of capitalism. It's inherently hostile. And so if you look at what happened in Seattle, the $15 an hour is a very, very important example. The way we won was not the way he is saying it. He's saying that, the Democratic Council members, they all wanted, we're going to just bring everyone together. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Either he is just saying these things or he believes these things and is in for a root shock. I don't know, because I'm not a mind reader. What I can tell you,
he might disappoint us, but he doesn't strike me as naive. I don't think I would put it more in the camp of I pinned this comment because I think that this reflects what a lot of people our thinking and the fight that I had with a friend earlier today, which is he's running as a Democrat. What do you expect him to say? Do you want him to have the position of power? Do you want the left is allergic to winning? Just let him say what he needs to say within some guidelines to win. And I'm not saying that, but I do think that there is a like the competency, the fluency that he has had with kind of left history, the like biographical facts that we know about his dad and his politics. Those things aren't dispositive. Obviously, Harris has a socialist dad and Pete Buttigieg has a socialist dad. Doesn't mean everything. But the way that he's lived his life, the video of him like tussling with ICE agents, on Congress, like all of those things together make me feel like he knows better. And he's not naive.
I'm not. Yeah, I'm not.
Wait a minute. I just kind of just. I'm not saying anything about what's going to happen going forward. I think I've been really clear about my concern and my skepticism and my worry and like the audacity of hope that I'm like really is freaking me out. But like, I don't.
Isn't that the title of Obama's book?
I'm sorry.
Isn't the audacity of hope the title of Obama's book? Yeah, that's what you're saying. Okay.
Yeah. But that's all I'm saying. That if there's a difference between him and AOC, and I don't mean this is like a hit on AOC or anything, but he does seem like, because I didn't know anything about anything, especially when I was 28, which is the age she was when she was elected. But like he seems like exceptionally studied and that about left theory, and that is in left history, and that is why he is able to, I think, articulate the arguments better than so many other people who have been in his position. That's all I would say. So to the extent that, is he so naive as to think that he can just sort of like bureaucracy his way into a better future? I would suspect that he's not so naive. Now, is he just saying that because it's what you say on an interview when, you've won and you're trying to seem like a peacemaker? Maybe. But
here's the deal. I mean, we can only go by what he is saying, and then you can surmise, why is he saying this? Does he actually believe it, or is he naive? And in fact, I am not calling him naive. In fact, I'm saying the opposite actually, but I'm trying to say it in a nice way. I'm saying that I'm not even venturing to make conclusions about what he actually intends, because I don't know that. I am telling you that if that is what he believes, then this is where it leads, is what I'm saying. So I'm actually, if it's sounding like I think he's naive, then take that as me trying to be complimentary towards him, because the alternative is actually, in my view, even worse, which is that you are calculatedly saying these things. And in my view, that is true. And that doesn't necessarily mean bad intentions. That means
but calculated, that's what I'm getting at. Is it calculated just to get the enemies off your back so you can just get into the grace?
But that's the thing. Whether it is calculated or not, it's a mistake to believe that you can get the enemies off your back by smiling endlessly.
Right. Can we differentiate this a little bit? There's one thing one thing is to say, I can beat the billionaires by being nice. We all agree that that's bad. But to deny that he is empowered by getting the public on his side and not giving them easy ammunition to attack him, I think is a different kind of thing, right? So like, I completely agree with you, obviously, that you can't play your there's no like, you can do entryism, frankly, is because I don't think there's any surviving within the Democratic Party. But do I think that Bernie might have been able to win or come closer to winning in like 2016 if he were a little bit more gracious, had done a little bit more, I don't know, like of the glad handing and shaking hands with like the Black faith community in some southern state, maybe that would have helped. Would it have helped if he didn't put a big target on his back about certain issues when he stepped in it and wouldn't just get up to date and get his lingo together, whether it's about Black stuff or trans stuff or whatever? Yeah, I think it would have helped. So I think that's all I'm saying. Like,
but such a thing doesn't exist. First of all, I don't believe, and this is my honest belief, and I'll come to the secondary point in a second, because it's, again, as I said, I'm not claiming to be inside his brain, but this is what I think. First of all, I don't think that it is some sort of just a calculation that it's a pragmatism that I do intend to fight on these things. I do intend to fight for a rent freeze, and at that time I will take on a battle with the real estate barons and the landlord barons and Wall Street. But right now, it's very clever of me to keep them off my back in order to keep going, sort of in an electoral calculus. First of all, I don't believe such a thing exists, because if you genuinely thought that these billionaires are evil and that
he's not saying I'm going to make friends with the landlord class. What he's saying,
no, but that is what he's saying. Effectively,
when did he say that? When did he say I want to make friends? Now that I've won the election.
Look, if he keeps saying things like, I think that I can get the New York City Council on my side. It's only been the mayor. I mean, this is something he's actually said. It's only the mayor after mayor who have been an obstacle. That is him saying that I'm going to make.
That's fair. That's fair. I don't know. Okay?
So my point is this: if you actually understand that the Democrats, the real estate barons, the billionaire Ackman, whoever is not on your side, if you actually understand that a rent freeze is not something that Ackman will think is good for him or his interest, then are you actually, coming out and saying that even though it's not true, and you're lying to the working class? I don't believe that that's the case. I believe that the reason he's saying that is because it is a reformist sort of ideology, and I totally agree with you. He's very well versed and well read, but I completely disagree with the things that he has concluded from his readings about capitalism. That's the thing. I mean,
what do you make of this argument? What do you make of this argument? I'm just mooting this. What do you make of this argument that without a mass movement, it's all reformism, because no one person is going to do much of anything?
No, I mean.
Wait a minute. Let me just finish this. That the argument about Bernie, in part, you want him to win. I worked for him. We were all behind Bernie. When I went to Google a picture of you to put you in the thumbnail for this, there was one with your arm around Bernie, and I flirted with the second with using it. So we were all rooting for Bernie. So we were all there at one point thinking that there was utility in him winning. So his point, Bernie's point was, it's not me, us. We have to have this mass movement. And his disappointment of Bernie came in part because he dismantled that movement. We will see what happens with Zohran, but he won in part because he was able to galvanize his 50,000 volunteers. That's an incredible feat, one that should be replicated for left ends all across the country. And we'll see what he does with that once he's in office, if he ever gets there, or if they kick him out, if he then continues to mobilize that army to put pressure on whoever is mayor and do whatever in the streets of New York, which would also be awesome. But my point is, without the mass movement, everyone's a reformist, no matter how good their lingo is, because there's only so much you can do beyond like reformism.
No. I mean, it's certainly
the tail of the conclusion of this for me is therefore, there's an argument that says if we want there to be the break, the split within the Democratic Party, the question isn't, what did they say to get into office? I think that there's an argument that says they needed to get into office. They need to have the platform. They at least need to run to get the platform to be able to illustrate the contradictions within the Democratic Party that are going to help lead people to the break. So the question to me is there like some kind of trade-off that we might see as legitimate between making yourself likable, getting the people on your side, not necessarily just by being nice, but by talking about the issues and fighting for the issues that they care about, even if it's within the party, all these kinds of things, because you need to have the platform, you need to have the visibility in order to get the spot on the Aaron Burnett show where you can start making the case about why socialism is good and start over time illustrating the contradictions in the Democratic Party that would ultimately lead people to leave. That I think is one version of events. What do you make of that?
Well, first of all, I would say that if, let's say hypothetically, he's doing what, one of the things you're suggesting as a possibility, that he's saying these things just so he doesn't have the target on his back right away, but then he's going to fight for the rent freeze and $30 an hour, and then he's going to take on the battle. He's just doing this to get elected. I hope that's true. Okay, like I said, for me, it's not a sectarian question. It is about what we can win for the working class. So I'm just being I'm engaging in this discussion just very honestly. It's not about him or against him or anything like that.
In good faith.
In good. Yes, I mean, that's why your show is named Bad Faith, right? Because we're in good faith. Exactly. What I'm trying to say is that I am just extremely skeptical that that's the case, that he is later he's going to take on the battle. Just now, right now, he's just saying things to massage the class divide so that the billionaires don't come after him, and so on and so forth. First of all, I don't believe, like I said, if he does do that, that's great. Because to be clear, in order to actually win what he's talking about, and also go beyond that, raise the consciousness of the working class, which I care about as a revolutionary, it's not only about what reforms you win, is going to take pitch battle against the people that he's trying to be smiling towards. So it's whether he smiles or not is not the issue. The issue is he willing to go into battle? So no matter how much he smiles, if he keeps smiling after he gets elected, but he does go into pitch battle against the billionaires, they're not going to like him. They're not going to say, oh, you're smiling. And in fact, they hate him already. He's not fooling them. They are apoplectic. We've seen these people on NBC saying, oh my God, it's like there's one good way of doing rent free is just drive everyone out. This is the arguments we heard when we were fighting for 15 as well. So first of all, if he is actually just postponing his battle, then great. I will be the first to admit, hey, I was wrong. This is fantastic. I'm so glad he's doing that finally. My second point is, I don't think that's the case. Partly because I've seen his record in his and the other DSA electors in the New York State legislature. I've seen their record. I'm just not convinced that they're going to do it because they haven't done it. They've had 8 elected officials for several years. They haven't actually become what you need to become, which is enemy number 1 of the ruling class and the Democratic Party. They haven't done that. They're generally sort of peaceful, but also have taken on some battles here and there. The same thing is true of Bernie Sanders. It's a question of where you draw the bar. Am I saying that they have never antagonized the ruling class? Of course not. Bernie Sanders was a massive, massive migraine for the Democratic elite when he ran in the primary elections. But what did they end up doing? They crushed him. Every single time he tried to do anything, they crushed him. So I don't believe that that's the case. And even if he were to do at any point he takes on battle, then he will become enemy number 1. So there is at no point, whether it is now or later, just now I'm just winning the election, but I'll do it later. It doesn't matter when you do it. The moment you're clear, okay, now we need to go into this class battle and we have become enemy number 1 of the billionaires, then they will come after you. There is no world, there's no universe where at some moment you can win for working class people, raise their consciousness about capitalism, and also not have the capitalist class hate you. And
I agree. I just want to clarify the argument is that the smiling is for not the billionaires, but for the regular people.
No,
that when the billionaires, when the billionaires come after you.
But that's not the essential thing, though, Brianna. The essential thing is not. Can I just explain?
I want to make sure we have time to move on and talk about your stuff. But I really gotta land this plane. I don't want it to be misrepresented. I can't have it out there that I think smiling at billionaires works. So I want to be really clear that of course. That's
I'm not saying that you're saying that. I'm not saying that you're saying that.
No one's saying that. No one in our space is saying that. But the argument is that it's good actually for him to be likable. And that it's because when people come for Bernie, that there are people who are defending Zohran in this moment who did not defend Bernie.
No, that's not. No, Brianna, that is not the reason they're defending him.
Can I just finish my argument? I just want to make sure that I'm understood before you push back against me. Please. I just want to be understood. All I'm saying is that when we were fighting these battles, and the battles are fought off in the media, and they're fought in the halls of the city and state government, and all of these other kinds of things. When we had no support because folks like Roland Martin are saying that Bernie Sanders hates Black people and they're yada yada yada. But I look at his page today, and he's enthusiastic about Zohran. There's a lot of things that go into that, including fundamentally that Andrew Cuomo is so terrible that everybody wants an alternative. All I'm saying is that I'm just trying to credit Zohran Mamdani's political skill, and that getting the public on your side makes it much more difficult for people to vilify you. And we've seen as an example what happened with the Israel stuff. They threw everything that they could at him, but not just because of Zohran, but because there's been this whole movement for a year and a half now, educating people and explaining why it is that they should be on the side of Palestinians. Those attacks rolled off in a way that they might not have in a different context, and being being appealing, not just interpersonally, but because of your values and who you've stood with and who you've marched with, and the taxi advocacy and all of that, I think goes away to insulating yourself against the attacks that of course are going to come, no matter how pleasant you are, from the interest groups that you're threatening with your socialist politics. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, and so first of all, yeah, I'm sorry I interrupted you. For some reason I thought that you were mostly done speaking, so I apologize.
No worries.
I think that the best way to get working people on your side is to relentlessly fight for their interests. But if you are relentlessly fighting for their interests, then the only way you can actually win, and it comes back to the point you were making earlier about movements, and I wanted to get back to that, and I also want to talk about the LaGuardia thing, because I think that is also revealing that he keeps likening himself to LaGuardia, and that, to me, that's quite revealing as a Marxist, and I want to come back to that.
Okay.
But so I mean, let's start with the premise, right? If we want to win a massive victories for the working class, let alone revolutionary victories against capitalism, then you need mass movements. And in order to have mass movements, you need to get working people on your side. I mean, we won all these historic victories because we have been phenomenally successful. We were phenomenally successful in using my elected office to mobilize and galvanize tens upon tens of thousands of Seattleites and also people in the region to win just any number of victories. I mean, one of our people in our new congressional campaign was telling me that actually we have won so many victories, decisive victories, that it's actually hard to put them on. We were trying to list them, and it's hard to get them other than on a booklet. Mm-hmm. So that's how many we have won. And I'm not saying that as a personal boast. I'm saying that as a complete confirmation of the strategy that we have used. So if we agree that, yes, we want to win the maximum for the working class, if we agree that that requires building mass movements, and that requires you as, if it's through an electoral campaign, but even if it's through labor movement or social movement, it still requires leaders. You need leaders to galvanize people. Okay, if we agree with that premise, then the next point is that in order to get working people on your side, the best way is to tell them the truth. That is the problem. So even that is why I'm saying, let's not get into the business of impugning anyone's intentions. Even if you intend it in the best way possible, if you go around giving illusions to people that somehow we can do this by smiling our way into it, and that is where the smiling comes. It is not about the superficial smiling. It doesn't matter how much he smiles. If he actually fights against people, the billionaires, then he will get a target on his back. And so I'm trying to give you a concrete difference. He keeps saying because he's running for office, you're saying that possibly he's doing that because he's running for office, he needs to win election. Okay, let's go with that. I don't believe that, but let's go with that. Then what he is saying is that I will be a mayor for all New Yorkers. What I said when I was running for election is I don't represent the billionaire class. That was my starting point. The reporters would ask me, but aren't you supposed to represent your constituents? And my response to them was, do you know who one of my constituents is? Is this, at that time, the billionaire CEO of Starbucks, Howard Schultz. He lived in my district. He lives walking distance from me, actually. Mm-hmm. I don't represent him. I don't represent all Seattleites. I am running for Congress not to represent all residents of the 9th Congressional District, certainly not all residents of the United States. No, I am running to represent working class people and people who support this agenda for working class people. I am running to represent the anti-war movement. And so can you see the difference? I mean, it doesn't matter what you believe in your head. If you don't give the correct analysis of what is needed to win, then
I hear you, Kshama. And if I asked Zohran, if he comes back on the show and I ask him, you said you represent all people. Do you represent the landlord lobby? Do you represent Bill Ackman? Do you represent, and he says yes, well, then I would agree with you. If he says no, I should clarify that was sloppy language on my part.
But it's not sloppy
the,
language. It's not.
well,
I mean, yes, I assume.
That's why I'm presenting this hypothetical. Like, if he's given an opportunity to say, just come on, Kshama. Like, I just remember we have to go for real.
But Brianna,
for real. I think there's legitimate stuff to ding him on, and I'm happy to hear about the city council.
I'm not trying to ding him. I'm not trying to ding him. I'm here, like I said, in good faith to speak to the working class. I'm not speaking to Zohran Mamdani.
If I say I love all the world's people, and you're like, no, you love Jeffrey Epstein, I'm like, come on, give me a break. I just meant that I love humanity. Like, I wasn't like, oh, you love O.J. Simpson. Like, come on. Like, I think that's a very common rhetorical thing to say is I represent everybody. I'm for all New Yorkers, Muslim, Jewish, female, male, and all the genders in between. Like, that's just the thing that you say as a politician when you win a race. So, like, I'm open to the idea that it means something else, or that there's other things about him that suggest that he's going to be more of a reformist. But I'm just saying, me personally, that one is not the most persuasive.
I can see that, and that's fair. But I'm saying that for ordinary people to say that, I support all humanity, that's what it means. And I don't disagree with you at all. What I am saying is that when you have a politician running and they say I represent everyone, that does mean something. I'm trying to differentiate between ordinary people saying that and people in politics saying it, because it does carry some meaning. But okay, fine. I don't have a problem if he actually says that, oh, that's not what I mean. That's fair enough. I'm not pushing back against good things. If he's saying the right things, and if I can help push him to say the right thing, then that's good. That's good for the working class. So I'm not going to reject that progress. But I also think it's a contradiction. I mean, you can't on the one hand say that he's sloppy, and then on the other hand say that, well, he's one of the most well-versed and the most well-read and most articulate.
Those things be true. I've been sloppy.
No, Brianna, that is just
sloppy. Again, I've been articulate. No,
like I said, look, we can agree to disagree. I'm just telling you my point of view. I mean, we don't have to be stuck on this. Let's move on to the other point. But I think that what I'm saying is that I don't actually believe that it comes from nowhere. I think it comes from a place of believing that, as I said, you can square a circle, that you can win all these victories and yet not anger the ruling class. It doesn't work that way. I mean, when we won $15 an hour and the Amazon tax, we needed to put the Democratic Party on notice. It was not through my collegiality towards the Democrats that worked. And to be clear,
this feels like a straw man, because he's not saying I'm not going to alienate the ruling class. And in fact, he's already enormously irritated them.
He is irritating. But see, this is the thing. This is what's deceptive about this. It's not about him. It's about what's needed for the working class. And again, you have leaders who say that we can do both. We can both keep the peace with the ruling class and we can win substantive victories. It doesn't work that way. And actually, the fact that what you're reminding me of, that the ruling class is against him anyway, that's actually a very important point. That's what we saw with Jamal Bowman. He tried to play both sides, and then AIPAC ran historic amounts of money against him anyway. That's what I'm saying. So that's why better to pick one side. No, I'm not saying it's the same thing. I'm just making a larger point that no matter what, if you start fighting for working class people, then you will have a target on your back. So I'm challenging your logic. You're saying that, oh, maybe he's doing these things to not have a target on your back. I'm saying that there is no universe where you can't have a target on your back if you're going to bring up these demands. That's all I'm saying.
Agree. All I'm saying is that sometimes the target is from the corporatists, the billionaires, the elites, and sometimes they end up agreeing with regular people, including the working class, because you have done an insufficient job pitching yourself to them, fighting for their interests, all of those kinds of things.
Yeah, and
one half of that you can control, and to the extent that you can control that and is doing a good job there, I'm just.
No, I mean, I don't think that it's not so much about that control. It's about the approach that people are using. And I think, and I understand that there is confusion about this. Absolutely understand, because he is doing certain things that are needed to be done, like being relentless on demands. All of that is absolutely important. It's a question of what what is overall needed about this. And that's why I think it'll help to talk about our congressional campaign.
Well, let's pivot and let's use some of these questions that people have asked as a way to pivot, because some of them are like about like, well, what would you do differently? And then that gives you a good springboard. So where many asks, Kshama talks a lot about zero sum, yet her binary language gives her away. She hasn't had the transformation to move beyond zero sum. It's not about smiles, it's about energy, intention, and love for the other. So this is a little bit of what we were talking about, I guess, most recently. So let me rephrase this question as, you know, I would push back against the premise that you haven't had the transformation, because as you've alluded to, you've accomplished a great deal in Seattle. But what about folks who are looking at your congressional campaign and are like, well, how are you going to get the energy and excitement around your campaign that propelled Mamdani into victory? Like, what's your strategy to actually winning? You know, given the critiques that you've been laying out for the last, hour and a half or so.
Yeah, I mean, like you said already, Biana, and like I've said as well, this is not a new thing. This is not the first time we have to prove that we can do it. We have done it. I was on the Seattle City Council for 10 years. I ran 4 elections. The last one was a recall effort against me by corporate landlords and big business and the right wing. And I won all those elections. Does that mean that I can win every election and there's not going to be any defeats? No, absolutely not. The thing is, but what we have shown is that we can win. And as a matter of fact, we have won every single election that we ran for the city council. And every single election was a battleground. It was never, ever easy. And the way I'm speaking today is exactly the way I have spoken every single time. And every single time we have galvanized incredible numbers of working people to volunteer on the campaign, go door knocking, knock on hundreds of thousands of doors. I mean, I'm talking about it at the district level. And now we'll be in a congressional campaign, we'll be knocking on millions of doors. We have, our campaigns, including with the last one, we have set the fundraising records in the city of Seattle for city council races. And it is with this approach that we have done that. I don't understand what this person means where they say she hasn't yet moved beyond zero sum. I don't understand that. Either. Why would I move beyond it? Because it's my job to relentlessly tell working people what the nature of capitalism is. So I have no plans to move away from that. But this is how a revolutionary wins elections and wins reforms, is by relentlessly speaking the truth to working people and explaining to them what is needed. So when we had, for example, when we ran our first campaign for city council in 2013, we the most prominent demand in our campaign was $15 an hour. And at that time, it was considered not only utopian, all the big business establishment was completely beside themselves in fury. Like they couldn't believe the audacity, the temerity of our campaign. And we were very small at that time, and I was completely unknown. And they were all nonplussed. Like, who is this upstart who is going around calling herself a socialist? And does she even understand economics? And of course, it didn't help them that I have a PhD in economics. And we were able to push back completely on all their falsehood about how it's going to be lights out in Seattle if the wages increase, let alone to 15. And then we won the election on that basis. I didn't go around saying things like, well, this will be good for everyone. I didn't say that. I said, yeah, big business hate it because if we increase the wages to 15, it's going to come out of their profits and they are loath to give it up. But working people do need an improvement in their standard of living. Are you willing to fight with me? That is how we put the question to the working class. And over and over and over again, the working class will not disappoint you. And that's the difference too between a reformist and a revolutionary approach, is that a revolutionary will always have faith in the working class, faith that the working class will come through to win for their own selves, in their own interest and in their collective interest of humanity, that they will come through. That is the basis on which we have won. Like, for example, we won the first election, and the Seattle Times, I don't know if I already mentioned this here, but they wrote after my first election victory that my election victory, coming out of nowhere, was a referendum on $15 an hour because it was so prominent that if you were voting for Kshama Sawant that year, you were voting for 15. That's how we turned the election into that. And then after I took office, I immediately launched the 15 Now movement. And you know what happened in the first couple of weeks that I was in office? The two most prominent Democrats, I mean, it was all corporate Democrats. It was always Democrats, but at that time it was very, very openly corporate Democrats. Two of the most prominent Democrats in the city council came to my office, sat me down, and said, it's all well and good that you have roused the rabble and got elected, but we are here to tell you that City Hall runs on our terms, and you are not going to win any minimum wage increase, let alone 15. Less than 6 months later, we had won $15 an hour, and those two included were forced to vote yes. And one of them was in tears that day because they really didn't want to do it, but they were forced to do it. Why? Because we brought what a corporate landlord called Sawant's army. We got the army, and they literally would call it the Red Army because we literally had red t-shirts. We brought the army of the working class. I used my office to bring the army of the working class into City Hall, but it wasn't only the numbers. First of all, yes, the numbers matter and how much of a furor you create in the city in favor of this demand and, get working class invested in fighting for it. All of that matters, but the character of the movement also matters. And here's where the difference between revolutionaries and reformists also comes out. We didn't bring working class people to come and say, please, Council Member Clark, please, Council Member Burgess, can you please pass 15? We said, shame on you for speaking against poor people who are struggling to get by. You need to be thrown out if you vote no on this. And we're watching you. We're watching you, what you do. If you want any political future, you got to vote yes. That is what is called a fighting approach to movement building, where you call out the leaders by name and you shame them publicly. You put a political price tag on them that if they defy the working class movement, it will come at personal political cost for their careers. That is what we did, and that is how we won $15 an hour. And then the Seattle Times, I'm quoting the Seattle Times because, the enemies give you the compliments, because they are not going to give you false compliments. They're only going to tell you when they're forced. They're only going to say about you that they're forced to say. So the quote about Sawant's army, that was from a corporate landlord lobbyist. After we won 15, the Seattle Times editorial board wrote that Sawant will appropriately get credit for having come out of nowhere and commandeered the political agenda of the city to win 15. That is what we did. And I'm not saying myself only, but we used that office in that way to win. And so over and over and over again, we upended the Democratic majority to keep winning victories. But it's not only about the victories. We raised the consciousness of the working class. We exposed. This is perhaps the most important thing that we did, Brianna, is expose the character of the Democratic Party in the eyes of the working class. Because the starting point of many working people, understandably, is, but isn't so-and-so Democrat on our side? But really, you're saying that we can't trust her? So they're not going to take my word for it. There have been any number of conversations where they would say, oh, really, you're going too far, aren't you? So we demonstrated through the unfolding of the movement for them to see with their own eyes and then get really angry at them and then, be willing to fight back. So that's the approach that I think is needed. And so, it's not about, dinging anyone personally or, just gratuitously questioning what they're saying. It's about actually talking about what we would need in order to be able to win. And let's be clear, that is what we are going to need to end the genocide, to end U.S. military funding as well. I mean, we are not going to be able to end that on the basis of, okay, the Democrats, no, the Democrats are the party of genocide. There is no future there.
Right. So Kshama, just conscious of the fact that there's 10 more questions in this queue, and I also want to give you free space to talk about your campaign. I want to ask you about Adam Smith and who he is and why people should be galvanized against him, and in the same way that people were animated about Cuomo. But just to conscious of how many questions we have to get through, if we could just keep the responses a little bit tighter, and then we can come back and elaborate on more things afterward. I just want to make sure that everyone gets their question read. Thank you to the Black Hercules saying, let's get to work. I don't know the answer to this question. The Flower Bro, is there merit to the claims that Zohran took Teal money? Not to my knowledge.
I do.
Sorry, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I can just. I mean, I don't want to make any far-reaching conclusions because I don't know. I can only tell you what I know about that. Is actually Nick Cruz from RBN. He was the one who told me about it when I was on his show. Is that a Thiel fellow named Fahim Zaman, I think, has donated $100,000 to a PAC for Zohran Mamdani, I think. And obviously, if you're a Thiel fellow, it does not, Peter Thiel is not going to sponsor fellowships for somebody who is going to support socialism. And some of the things Fahim Zaman has said are quite disturbing, like a decentralized banking in the neocolonial world. That is absolutely deadly. That means more misery for working class people. He has also said something like he wants to reimagine healthcare or something. Again, that's code for me to,
That's Peter Thiel or this guy who gave the donation?
No, the guy who's a Thiel fellow. I'm just telling you what I know about him,
Okay.
not about Mamdani.
Okay. FireFay83 says, I want Zohran to disprove my cynicism so bad. He does strike me as more genuine than AOC ever was. Then again, I also thought that about Obama. Yeah, I think that's the place we're all sort of in right now. Flower Bro again says, Bernie can't be anti-oligarchy until he becomes anti-Zionist. I do agree that his refusal to really call the genocide for what it is and not just try to lay it at the feet of Bibi Netanyahu as an individual continues to be frustrating, as was his recent appearance on the Joe Rogan show, where he does the long preamble that really centers October 7th and decenters the Palestinian right to resist and to exist.
Yes.
Passionate Rebellion says the issue is that to take over the Democratic Party, we would need 100 Zohran Mamdanis. I mean, what do you make of this argument that says, even let's put Zohran to the side and take you? I have had the experience in the wake of 2020 of having other prospective electeds on, people who are running, I think good people who share my values and my politics, who are running in districts across the country in congressional races, who my audience really had a hard time buying into because they didn't believe that even if they were to be successful, that they would be able to do anything within the Democratic Party and they would be put down like a dog, like all the squad members have been. So what do you say to people who are disillusioned in that way, as someone who is also running for a congressional seat right now?
I would say that all of history, and including our experience in Seattle, all of it decisively, just unambiguously, without a doubt, shows that we can't win the kind of massive victories we need to win, like free healthcare for all by taxing the rich, like ending the genocide, like ending all medical and student debt, all the things that we need actually to have even a semi-decent life for billions of people. That can't be won on the basis of 1 or 100 of these people having this type of approach. I don't think such a thing exists. But look, maybe I'm just intellectually unimaginative, and there is a way. If there is a way, like I said, I'll be the first to happily say, oh wow, there is a way. I'm just telling you now, I don't think there is a way. There is no other way other than actual fight back, and the kind of fight back that we need cannot happen from inside the Democratic Party. We need a ferocious, yes, it would if you had 100 people who were willing to lead a ferocious battle inside the Democratic Party, then it would be in some shape or form, the outcome of that would be like forming a new party, because it would lead to a split in the Democratic Party. Yes, and if there were 100 people hypothetically wanting to do that, then absolutely I would strongly support them. I just don't believe that that's what's happening here. That's why I think, I'm telling you what I think is the truth in good faith, that working class people need to build independent movements, and electoral politics should be part of that, but it should be a small part of the movement. And just last but not least, whether you're talking about electoral offices or elected labor offices or social, unelected social movement leaders, no matter what arena of movement building you're talking about, ultimately, if these movements don't have leaders who understand that you cannot build alliances with billionaires or their parties and also not sell out working class people, then we're not going to win. So my emphasis is on the kind of leadership we need, not on these individuals.
So then what do you say if people ask then, well, why should I invest in your race? What do you hope to accomplish with the position that you hope to get when you oust Adam Smith?
Well, you've seen repeatedly what we have done in Seattle. Every election we have used, election campaign we have used as the vehicle to bring up a new demand that then we build momentum for. Like in 2013, like I said, we made $15 an hour the main demand, and then we won it. We made our 2019 election, which was again a pitched battle between me and Amazon. They threw down over $1 million to not only defeat me, but also other progressive Democrats. And they lost miserably. And in that year, we talked about winning the Amazon tax. And my inauguration after the 2019 election, we turned it into the launch of the Tax Amazon movement. Despite COVID, with the support of the George Floyd rebellion, we won it. So over and over again, we have actively demonstrated that our revolutionary approach to election campaigning can and will galvanize movements. And right now, our goal is to build nationally the strongest election campaign against the genocide, against all U.S. military funding for the Israeli state, and for free healthcare for all by taxing the rich, and also for rent control.
Amazing. Let me read Ben Riley's question. He says, at this point, making the environment more hospitable to leftism is what's needed. My preference would be for him, Zohran, to argue for workplace democracy, but this is actually the lesser of two evils, in my humble opinion. So, I guess offering some support for the idea that it's good that Zohran is sort of doing comms for the ideas of socialism, demystifying socialism, destigmatizing socialism, even if he would quibble with some of his focus and he wants him to argue more about workplace democracy. Maybe there's time for that going forward. There's only so much anybody can say. And
I wouldn't fault somebody for not bringing up every single demand. It's more about what strategy you're presenting. And I think, as I've said before, Mamdani has done really important. I mean, it's important that he's holding all his demands front and center, and he never shies away from them.
Ben Riley goes on to say, if Bernie absorbed Yang/Tulsi and Warren wing, he would have won. The issue is the entire infrastructure we exist in is anti-left wing. We don't even have farmers and unions organizing with us anymore. You raised this point at the top, Kshama, about how many of the unions endorsed Cuomo despite it all. It's worth noting that UAW and some of the other big unions did endorse Zohran Mamdani. And I remember the discussion back in 2020 or 2016 being about how part of what gave Bernie's campaign legitimacy in the early days was some of those big union endorsements like NNU that made it seem less like a vanity campaign, or at least gave him the shield against accusations that this was an out of touch, top down kind of astroturfy movement as opposed to what it was. Do you have any thoughts about this one?
In the case of Bernie Sanders, yeah, absolutely. It was really crucial that he had endorsements like the NNU. And I don't think Bernie's fault ever was that he was running a vanity campaign Again, Bernie is a good example because, in my view, I think he is genuine. He's well-intentioned. He's not a calculated politician. But nonetheless, it still ends up betraying working class people because of the worldview he has. His worldview tells him that the only way you can go forward is by capitulating to the Democratic Party, and there's no other way. And so, whether he's well-intentioned or not, which I believe he is, he ends up selling out.
Yeah. We can maybe skip this one just because we've talked about this, unless you feel strongly about answering it. What are Kshama's preferred steps to the revolution?
Well, I think we need, a militant working class uprising. That is why I don't think it can only be about elections. But I also don't agree with people who eschew elections entirely and sort of make a false dichotomy between movement building and elections. Because if we don't engage, in a revolutionary approach to elections is to understand that if you do win elections, or even the election itself, campaign itself, is not to better administer the capitalist state, but to go there as a disruptor. Your role, even in the campaign trail, and much more so if you're elected, is to go there as a disruptor. So we need revolutionary movements will require that kind of work through elections, because if you don't run any candidates, then it leaves the field wide open for the Democrats and Republicans. But all of that most imperatively has to be tied to working class struggle, and most importantly, mass strike action, mass work stoppages to bring down to a grinding halt the capitalist profit machine is absolutely needed. I mean, just to be concrete, what's one of the things that's most urgently needed to end the genocide is for the dock workers and port workers at all the important ports, whether it is on the west coast of the US or the east coast of the US, all the important ports in Europe, to do a coordinated shutdown so that they can't, if one port is shut down, they can just go to another port and ship weapons to Israel. No, it should be a coordinated dock shutdown, refusing to transport any weapons to the Israeli state at all, complete shutdown. The French and Italian dock workers are doing that. That example needs to be emulated worldwide, especially in the US and Europe.
Ben Riley again. Ben, you got a lot of money to spend, apparently. Says you need a leader willing to give their lives for their cause, but also one willing to sacrifice others for their cause. I don't know about calling on other people to make that level of sacrifice, Ben. Do you have any thoughts about this one, Kshama?
I would say that, throughout history, we have seen uprising and rebellions, all the way from the anti-abolition movement, anti-slavery movement, the abolitionist movement, but also the Russian Revolution, any number of colonial revolutions against imperialism, all of these, and also strike actions, the formation of unions themselves over and over again throughout the history of class society, including the history of more recently of capitalism, shows that masses of people are going to be willing to make sacrifices. So you don't have to order them to do it. They will do it. What's missing right now is the leadership to make that happen.
Yeah. Observer says the working class has big built-in contradictions. It's not a question, but feel free to weigh in on that if you want to. And the last question is again from Ben Riley, who says, what path to success has the lowest computational complexity? Not sure I know exactly what you mean by computational complexity, but I want to give you a chance to weigh in on either or both of those. These are the last two.
Well, I think, just on the question of built-in contradictions, I don't know exactly what observer means there, but if it is referring to the fact that you have different viewpoints among the working class, and even some sections of the working class that might be somewhat conservative, right-leaning, may not have the correct kind of views on certain issues, that's going to be true, because as Karl Marx said, the ideas of any given time or any society are the ideas of the ruling class, and so a lot of working class people are inevitably going to absorb all the horrible ideas that are out there, because they are in the interest of the ruling class to bring out those ideas. For example, the concept of anti-black racism, as you well know, Brianna, anti-black racism was something that the early mercantile, the capitalist class of the United States had to manufacture in order to make people stomach the absolute horrors of Black slavery. So, is it a surprise that you have to wage a fight against racism? Absolutely not. But that's why we should not write off working class people, but try to fight to win them over to better ideas.
Kshama, I wanted to ask you, as we're closing up here, to paint a picture of Adam Smith, what kind of congressman he is, the relationship between his sort of support of endless wars in the war in Gaza as well, and why people should be invested in making sure he's not in Congress anymore and that you are.
Yes. So Adam Smith is part of the infrastructure of warmongering and genocide that are the Democratic and Republican parties. If you look at how much is what is happening not even mentioning the deaths in Iran, over 1,000 people who were killed in Iran. But if you look at what's happened in Gaza, as we were talking about, the death toll likely surpassing 400,000 people, at least 100 Gazan children being injured or killed daily. And massive famine, and now the complete scandal with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, where people are literally made sitting ducks, and the Israeli military has admitted that the soldiers are being told to shoot at people who are hungry and are coming in utter desperation to get food for their families. Well, Adam Smith is one of the guys who has blood of these 400,000 Palestinians on his hands, because he has voted for genocide. He has voted for over many years. He's been in Congress for over 30 years. He has voted for tens of billions of dollars of military funding for the Israeli state, including the genocide. He has called anti-war protesters, in the last year, anti-war protesters left-wing fascists and totalitarian, and he has called for anti-war protesters to be arrested. He also is one of the 5 remaining Democrats in Congress who voted for the Iraq war. So he also has the blood of 1 million Iraqis on his hand. He has also voted for wars in Kosovo, Libya, Syria, and Afghanistan. In fact, he really was against drawing down troops in Afghanistan. And he's not, and he's a ranking member of the Armed Services Committee, meaning he's a higher, he's a general in the war hawk machinery. He's not a foot soldier. And he was also, when the Democrats had a majority, the chair of the Armed Services Committee. And he is a favorite of companies like Palantir and Lockheed Martin, all these weapons manufacturers, war intelligence corporations. And as the Asian Times correctly said about Alexander Karp, the CEO of Palantir, he is building the machinery for perpetual war. Karp is, and Karp has already donated the maximum to Adam Smith already, for next year's election. And in the last year's election, Adam Smith's biggest donor was AIPAC, the Zionist lobby. And overall, the Zionist lobby have given him over $500,000. And so this is the guy we are running against. And it's not just that. He also voted to create ICE. He voted with George W. Bush to give a bailout to the big banks while ordinary people, millions of homeowners, were being sold out. And so over and over again, he has, he is one of the lead Democrats that represents the interests of big business, of the war industry, of the billionaire class as a whole, even health insurance corporations like United Healthcare, Humana, Cigna, all of whom are viciously opposed to Medicare for all. All of them have donated to Smith's campaigns. And he is actually not if all of this was not enough, he's also one of the Democrats who has kept insisting that the Democratic Party needs to move further rightward and become more friendly to big business. And that position he has had for decades, and that has hardened over time. Last year in December, he appeared with a Trump-supporting podcast host, here locally, and he railed against what he called, quote unquote, extreme left policies of the Democratic Party, claiming that that's what handed the election to Trump. And keep in mind, this was at a time when, in fact, Biden and Harris were trying to out-Trump Trump. And so, on that show, it has a conservative audience. One of the right-wing commentators remarked, correctly so, they said, Adam Smith sounds more like a Republican than a lot of Republicans. So this is the guy we are running against. We're running an independent socialist campaign against the genocide, against all U.S. military funding, for free healthcare for all, funded by taxing the rich, and for rent control. And if this is exciting to people should join us. Go to kshamasawant.org, my first name and last name.org. We need your donations. We have had a fantastic start. We had a target of raising $100,000 in the first month after we announced our campaign. We broke through that target in the first 3 weeks of our campaign. And we have donations from working people from 43 different states, and also Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico. So it's a national campaign.
Do you think, I plan to have a talk with Srikat Chakrabarti, who's running against Nancy Pelosi. I've been trying to get him for a while, and he finally reached out to me after the Zohran stuff saying, let's get something on the books for a week or so. I think there's some sense that there's excitement around the idea of the left actually winning these kinds of races because of Zohran's successes. And I wonder if you look at this moment and you think that there's anything that you've felt like you want to take away or that could be helpful to you having watched Zohran's success in the New York race.
As I said before, when we first started, it's interesting, we're coming sort of full circle, is that, Mamdani won his primary despite being falsely smeared as an anti-Semite. And in a city where, arguably has some really powerful Zionists, it also has Wall Street, and, there's a real link between the two because capitalism and imperialism go together. So if he can win an election, that genuinely is a reflection of the fact that the working class is absolutely ready to deliver a defeat to Zionism, to imperialism. And like I said before, many people have contacted our campaign saying, I'm so excited because this means that we can do this in the 9th Congressional District. A lot of people, I have not heard anybody, including myself, who thinks that this is a negative thing. Mamdani's victory is a very, very positive thing. Please don't mistake my skepticism or my questions for somehow this being a bad thing. It's a very good thing, but we're talking about, okay, so what we've come this far, what would it take to actually win the demands that he's running on? And I think that's a fair question.
And I want to give you an opportunity to talk about this event specifically.
Yes. And
before we get to that, my bad. I'm sorry. Before we get to that, can you answer this question at the bottom? Didn't Adam Smith vote to kill the impeachment of Trump for the terrorist attack on Iran?
I think so. I should look that up, but I believe that I did look that up. And yes, I think he has done that. In fact, a lot of Democrats voted against impeaching. And it tells you, that's the bare minimum they could do, but they didn't do it, which again, it's a giveaway. It's a telltale sign. And it's a sign of what I was saying earlier, which is that they are as much a party of imperialism as Trump and the Republicans are, but they have to posture, Yeah. I mean, on the one hand, they have to represent imperialist interests, but on the other hand, they also have electoral calculus. They have to portray Trump as, oh, he's the bad guy, so vote blue in the midterm. So, that's a balancing act for them, and it's completely disingenuous.
Yeah. Okay. Now I'm going to ask you the question about this event.
Yes, this is our national, as many of your viewers might know, or maybe some of them don't know, I've launched a national organization called Workers Strike Back alongside other socialists and working class people in order to take the fighting strategy that we have used so successfully in Seattle to a national stage. And this Workers Strike Back has grown tremendously over the last year, especially the last 8 months or so. And we had a democratic discussion and vote inside Workers Strike Back, where the overwhelming majority, 84 to 90% of the membership voted in favor of now really building the congressional campaign, our congressional campaign, and also a campaign for free healthcare for all in Seattle. So Workers Strike Back is all in on building these two campaigns. And we have monthly meetings over Zoom. And the next monthly meeting is in July. It's on July 6th over Zoom at 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern time. If you are excited about any of the stuff that we've been talking about, please join Workers Strike Back if you haven't already. And join us at this meeting. You can go to workerstrikeback.org and register for the meeting and get the Zoom link. Like I said, it's on Sunday, July 6th over Zoom at 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. And what we're going to be talking about is how to build the Kshama Sawant for Congress campaign, how to build the nation's strongest anti-genocide pro-worker campaign. And we're not going to win. I mean, we are up against AIPAC money and Palantir money and all these gatekeepers who are going to say, oh, you're against the genocide, but you should still vote for Adam Smith because Kshama is not nice and blah, 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 all of that. But, we are up against all of that, which means we have to wage a massive battle. That means that no matter where you are in the United States, we need your help. We need you to go and make a donation at kshamasawant.org. We need you to join Worker Strike Back so that we can make you part of group of people, hundreds, thousands of people who are fighting for this campaign nationally through phone bank, helping us through phone banking, through tabling in your own cities and building support for this campaign. But especially if you live in the Seattle area, then you need to come out and join our field campaign, because we need, Mamdani, one of the fantastic things about his campaign, very successful, which we should take note of and emulate, is the fact that he has 50,000 volunteers on the ground. That's the kind of campaign we need to run.
Yes, that I think is really the extraordinary part of the story. And I hope to get some of his staffers on who can speak more specifically to how they manage that. I think there's also a relationship between the social media piece, which of course all of the liberals want to focus on because they want to be able to like siphon off the piece of it that doesn't require them to change their politics at all and say, oh, the Democratic Party is going to do that. But leftists are pushing back saying, of course, it's the substantive policy. But I also think even just taking that social media piece, part of why there was so much organic pickup, like you can put out all the videos in the world, but people aren't reposting them and making their own content for you that goes viral and all of that sort of thing. You don't have the penetration. You don't have the ability to beat someone with the name recognition of Cuomo after not being known at all 3 months ago by most New Yorkers. And I think part of that is like when you have 50,000 organizers, you have 50,000 troops on the ground who are one, making their own content, and two, know other people in their lives that are making the kind of content. And so there's a kind of real, there's like, I think, layers to how like the effect of having that many volunteers in your camp actively invested, not just like passively watching the race, but invested because they're actually knocking doors for you. And therefore it's going to bleed over into other kinds of activities, including sort of publicity activities. So if you are in the Seattle area in particular, please do consider volunteering and contributing to this door knocking effort. I presume that your district, as AOC's was, is smaller in number than the number of people who live in the city of New York. And so the door knocking goes even farther in a context where there's fewer people. And so it really, really does matter. And I encourage people to donate and to support Kshama in all the ways that she just mentioned. Kshama, it's always such a pleasure to talk to you. And I really appreciate your generosity in staying with me now for over 2.5 hours. Any last words before we wrap?
Just to reiterate your very powerful message of solidarity, that we are going to need that type of army of volunteers, and we've always had that in every campaign, but we need that now much more so because the stakes are so much higher, because we're now not only up against Jeff Bezos and Starbucks in Seattle, which we are still up against them, but we are now also up against the Zionist lobby, AIPAC, and all the weapons manufacturers. So I could not agree more about how we need those thousands of volunteers, and that's the kind of campaign we intend to build, and that is what we will need to win. We are going to need thousands, tens of thousands of volunteers on the ground if we are to win. So if you want us to win, which I'm sure a lot of your viewers want us to, then we need your help. We need to make this a massive campaign that tens of thousands of people are invested in in that close level. It's not just that we need your donations, yes, but we also need you to get involved. And in fact, I would go so far as to say that if you are not in Seattle, but if you can afford to take time off and campaign with us in Seattle, then please get in touch with us, because we need you to do that.
It's ending the male loneliness crisis. People are getting dates off of campaigning together in New York City. Look, stop Adam Smith. I think there's also something to when you're someone like Zohran who doesn't have the name recognition, framing it around stop that other guy that you do know who we hate is actually a great strategy too. So stop Adam Smith. He's a warmongering person, the way he's just been described. My lights are quitting on me. That's how I know that I need to get out of here. But thank you again, Kshama. Thank you for all of you who have not only come and watched this chat, but the gap between the number of likes and the number of people in the chat is non-existent. So well done. Everybody has pulled their weight. I really appreciate you all. Hopefully we're going to do these, I almost called it a call-in, live streams a little bit more regularly because I really enjoyed this. Everybody take care of yourselves and remember to keep the faith. Thanks again, Kshama.
Thank you so much, Brianna. And I'm sorry if it got contentious at certain points.
No, girl, are you kidding me? That's our whole vibe. Like, that's my whole thing. That's our whole vibe. And I appreciate, let me say this. My mom and I talk about this sometimes, that I have a high tolerance for like conflict, and I don't find it to be like, I enjoy debating. And I think some aspect of it is cultural.
Yes.
I feel the same way.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I also come from a culture where, debating is even like just in regular life, social life. That is how people connect with each other. And the more you love someone, the more you're friendly with someone, the more you do that. And
100%.
I certainly feel that way about you, that, like I feel free to debate with you because I genuinely have lots of feeling for you. So I'm glad to hear that. It's
mutual. That's exactly how I feel. It's a privilege to be able to go back and forth with you because I value you so deeply and I respect you so much. And when I ask you pushback and follow-up questions, it's because I really want to know. And you've been such a guiding moral light, and your integrity has shown so bright for so many people who listen to this show and so many people who are struggling to find their place on the left in sort of the post-Bernie era. So I just really want to affirm how much I value you and how much I appreciate you and how much I enjoy talking to you on this show and off the record as well.
Thank you so much. And the feeling is absolutely 100% mutual. And all the back and forth you do, I think it's certainly hugely clarifying for me because it forces me to think further. And I have no doubt that it helps all your viewers, many of whom are actually volunteering for our campaigns as well. And I know a lot of Workers' Strike Back members are watching right now, so I'm sure they have really, really enjoyed this. So thank you so much.
Next time I'm going to wear my Workers' Strike Back t-shirt. It was just dirty.
Yeah, there you go. Let's both of us wear that.
All right.
Actually, Brianna, you got to buy our campaign t-shirt also. And then, both of us can wear the campaign t-shirt.
100%. 100%. Let me go. I'm going to look it up as soon as I log off from you. All right. Take care, Kshama. Thanks to you all. Keep the faith. Good night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.